It all started on a calm Saturday morning. I had barely poured myself a cup of coffee when my phone rang. It was my parents, letting me know they wanted to visit on Sunday, just to check in and spend some time with us. Being the straightforward man I am, I immediately agreed and told them it was a great idea. Family is important to me, and I figured a quiet Sunday at home with my parents sounded perfect. After hanging up, I told my wife about it. She didn't seem to mind, simply saying, "Okay, that's fine," and went back to whatever she was doing. For me, it was just another normal start to the weekend. Later that afternoon, something odd happened. I was sitting in the living room, scrolling through my phone, when I heard her phone ring. The sound itself wasn't unusual, but her reaction was. She practically jumped out of her chair, as if the call were some emergency. Before I could even ask what was going on, she darted toward the kitchen with her phone in hand. That kind of urgency was enough to catch my attention, so I got up and followed her. When I got closer, I could hear her speaking in a hushed voice. She wasn't just being quiet, she was whispering so softly I could barely make out a word. I leaned on the doorframe and asked, "What's going on?" "Who's calling?" She gave me a quick glance, waved her hand dismissively, and mouthed, "Later." That didn't sit right with me. What could be so secretive that she had to whisper like that? I stood there for a moment, debating whether to press the issue, but decided to let it go. She'd explain herself eventually. Or at least, I hoped she would. For now, I returned to the living room, but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something strange was unfolding. The conversation didn't end quickly, either. She stayed on the phone for nearly an hour. An entire hour of whispering. By the time she finally hung up, I was no longer just curious, I was irritated. What the hell was that about? I asked as soon as she reappeared. "Who on earth were you talking to for that long, and why were you whispering?" She looked at me with that casual, unbothered expression that drives me up the wall sometimes and said, "Oh, that was about tomorrow. We're going to have some guests." That set me off. "What do you mean, guests?" "My parents are coming over tomorrow." "Did you forget about that?" I could feel my temper rising, though I kept my tone steady. Her reply didn't help. "Yeah, I know. But these are secret guests," she said, as if that explained anything. "Secret guests?" I repeated, now genuinely annoyed. "You're kidding, right? Who are these people, and why are they coming here of all places? Did you even think to tell me before agreeing to this?" She sighed, as if I were the one being unreasonable, and said, "They're friends of mine." "Well, sort of. I met this woman online a couple of weeks ago on a forum about hobbies and fun stuff, and we really hit it off. She and her husband are coming to visit. They're unique. And they've got something big they want to share. Oh, and they're bringing us a special gift." I stared at her, dumbfounded. "So let me get this straight. Two complete strangers you met on the internet are coming to our house to sit with my parents, and you think this is a good idea?" My voice was calm, but the anger was bubbling beneath the surface. She nodded, unflinching. "It's not that big of a deal. I've already invited them, so it's happening. You'll see, it'll be fine." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She had already made the decision without consulting me, and now I was supposed to just go along with it? My jaw tightened as I fixed her with a hard stare. I didn't say another word. Instead, I turned on my heel and walked out of the room, leaving her standing there. In my head, all I could think was, who the hell are these people, and how is this supposed to work? I had a sinking feeling this wasn't going to end well. Sunday arrived, and with it came my parents. As expected, they were punctual, dressed in their usual conservative attire, bringing along a homemade pie and their usual warm but formal demeanor. My parents are the kind of people who value tradition and propriety above all else, and I've always respected that about them. As they settled into our living room, I could tell they were glad to be here, and I hoped it would be a peaceful afternoon. I kept glancing at my wife, silently praying that her secret guests would find some reason not to show up. Maybe they'd forget, or maybe the universe would intervene in some miraculous way to spare me the headache. The first hour passed smoothly enough. My mom complimented the curtains, my dad asked me about work, and my wife seemed content, even cheerful. It was a rare moment of calm. But, as if the universe had heard my earlier thoughts and decided to spite me, the doorbell rang. The sound shattered the peace like a rock through a window. My father glanced at me and asked, "Are you expecting someone else?" Before I could respond, my wife was already halfway to the door. "Oh, I forgot to mention," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral, "you're not the only guests we'll have today." My father raised an eyebrow, the lines on his forehead deepening. He's a man of few words, but that look spoke volumes. My mother, ever the picture of composure, sat up straighter, clearly intrigued, but not yet alarmed. Meanwhile, I could feel a knot forming in my stomach. When I turned to see who was at the door, I nearly lost my composure. There they were, the secret guests my wife had been so eager to host. The woman wore pink tights, a miniskirt that looked like it belonged in a high school wardrobe, and a crop top that barely covered anything. Her husband wasn't much better, with his long hair, ripped jeans, and a t-shirt featuring some obscure rock band. They looked completely out of place, like characters from a bad sitcom. My wife greeted them with a sparkle in her eyes that I hadn't seen in years. She looked thrilled, as if royalty had just arrived. Meanwhile, I turned to my mom and saw her pale visibly. My dad's expression shifted from curiosity to something closer to disbelief. Before I could even react, the guest stepped inside, carrying a large, brightly wrapped gift. They introduced themselves cheerfully, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. My wife ushered them into the living room, where they placed the gift on the coffee table and announced, "We brought something special for you all." The moment my wife began unwrapping the gift, I knew it was a mistake. Inside was a collection of items that I won't describe in detail, but let's just say they were anything but appropriate for a family gathering. My father's jaw tightened, and my mother looked like she might faint. I grabbed the box, muttered a terse thanks, and carried it out of the room before the situation could get any worse. I placed it in the hallway, far from everyone's view, and returned to find an awkward silence hanging in the air. We all sat down, and my father, ever the disciplinarian, tried to make polite conversation. But it was clear that things were already spiraling. The guests, oblivious to the tension, smiled and whispered to each other, completely at ease. Then came the moment that sealed the disaster. The man from the couple leaned forward and said, "Remember how we talked about making a big announcement?" My wife nodded eagerly. "Well," the man continued, "we've decided to open up our marriage, and we thought this would be the perfect time to share that with everyone." The room erupted. My father, who'd been holding his tongue all evening, could no longer contain himself. "That's not openness," he said sharply. "That's adultery. Plain and simple." The debate quickly escalated into a full-blown argument, with voices rising and tempers flaring. My mother, who hates confrontation, sat frozen, clutching the armrest like a lifeline. The guests tried to defend their lifestyle, but my father wasn't having any of it. At one point, he stood up and said, "If I were your age, I'd have knocked some sense into you by now. But I'm smarter than that, so we're leaving." I escorted my parents to the door, apologizing profusely as my father gave me a look I'll never forget. It was the kind of look that says, "You've really screwed up this time." No words were necessary. The shame hit me like a ton of bricks. After they left, I stood at the door for a moment, staring out into the night, wondering how this day had gone so disastrously wrong. Then, with a heavy sigh, I turned and walked back inside, bracing myself for whatever was to come next. My wife had brought the box back into the living room, and I couldn't believe my eyes as she started pulling out its contents and lining them up on the coffee table. It was bad enough that my parents had witnessed this circus the day before, but now she was treating it like a display at a trade show. I stood there for a moment, watching in disbelief, before turning to the couple who had just finished making themselves comfortable on our couch. "You couldn't have waited until another time, maybe told us privately. This whole thing was poorly timed as it is, and you've managed to make it worse by showing up on the same day as my parents." My tone was firm, leaving no room for ambiguity. Instead of taking the hint, my wife shot me a glare. "Stop ruining what's already ruined," she snapped. "You're not making things any better by harping on it." Her defiance was startling. Before I could respond, she grabbed my arm and dragged me into the kitchen. "We need to talk," I said through clenched teeth. She folded her arms and waited. "This can't go on. You've invited people into our home without consulting me, they caused a massive fight with my parents, and now you're defending them like this is all normal. This needs to stop." She rolled her eyes, clearly unimpressed. "You're overreacting. Things will settle down. Let's just get through the evening." I could feel my patience wearing thin, but I decided not to escalate things further. For the rest of the evening, I kept my distance, though my thoughts raced non-stop. What kind of mess had she dragged us into? I couldn't understand how she was so comfortable with everything that had happened. Later, as we sat in strained silence, I decided to address the practical matter of their stay. "When are you planning to leave?" I asked the couple directly. For once, they seemed caught off guard. The husband exchanged a look with his wife before responding, "Well, we were actually hoping to stay here for a while. You know, just until we get back on our feet." His casual tone made it sound as if this was a perfectly reasonable request. I stared at them, then at my wife, waiting for her to shut this idea down. To my shock, she said, "Of course you can stay. We have plenty of room." My stomach dropped. Was she serious? I managed to keep my composure but couldn't stop myself from thinking, this is unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. The couple wasted no time making themselves at home. They went to take a shower, together, of course, and I turned to my wife, finally letting my frustration show. "Do you even realize what you've done?" I asked, my voice low but intense. First, they completely disrupted things with my parents. Then, they decided they'd just stay here without even asking properly. And now you're letting them walk all over us. I have work tomorrow, and you'll be the one dealing with them. She shrugged dismissively. Your parents are too sensitive. It's not my fault they overreacted. And what's wrong with being hospitable? They needed a place to stay, and we have space. Her nonchalance was infuriating, but before I could argue further, she added, besides, tomorrow is going to be great. When you get home, you'll see. You'll love it. That night, we went to bed, leaving the couple to sleep on the couch in the living room. Also, I thought. Around midnight, I was jolted awake by noises coming from the other side of the house. At first, I tried to ignore it, hoping they'd quiet down. But it only got louder. I couldn't believe it when I realized what they were doing. Right there, in our living room. I lay there, fuming, unable to sleep, and knowing full well that tomorrow was going to be an even bigger disaster. In the morning, as I got ready for work, I turned to my wife and said, if this kind of thing happens again, I'm throwing them out. I don't care how it looks or what they say. They're out. She waved me off like it was nothing. Oh, stop being so dramatic. By tonight, you'll feel differently. Just wait and see. You'll come around. Her confidence only made me more uneasy, but I didn't have the energy to argue. Instead, I left for work, already dreading what I'd come home to. Leaving for work that morning, I tried to push the tension from the previous night out of my mind. I focused on the tasks ahead, hoping the day would provide some relief from the chaos at home. By the time I returned that evening, I was mentally exhausted and eager for a quiet dinner. But as I approached the house, the thumping bass of loud music greeted me before I even reached the door. My heart sank. This couldn't be real. Surely, I thought, I'd walked into someone else's nightmare. But no, it was my house. My sanctuary. And it was hosting a party I hadn't approved. Opening the door, I was met with a scene that could only be described as madness. Strangers were everywhere, spilling drinks, laughing loudly, and dancing without a care in the world. Some of my friends were there too, looking out of place and uncomfortable. One of them approached me as soon as I stepped inside. "Hey, man," he said, his voice low. I don't know whose idea this was, but it's not what I expected. There's some guy walking around pitching open marriage to people. It's weird. My blood boiled. "Where's my wife?" I asked, my voice clipped. He shrugged. "Haven't seen her in a while. Honestly, we were about to leave. This whole thing feels off." That was all I needed to hear. I pushed through the crowd, scanning faces and dodging spilled drinks, trying to find her. Strangers stared at me, but I ignored them, focused on my mission. After searching the downstairs rooms and finding no sign of her, I headed upstairs, dreading what I might find. My heart pounded as I checked each room. Finally, in the bedroom, I found her. She was sprawled across the bed, deeply asleep and clearly drunk. The sight made my stomach churn. This was my wife, the woman I'd vowed to build a life with, and here she was, passed out in the middle of a disaster she had likely facilitated. I stormed back downstairs and called for everyone's attention. "Party's over," I announced. "Get out. Now." Some people laughed, thinking I was joking, but I wasn't in the mood to argue. I said, "Get out." I bellowed. My friends backed me up, helping to usher the guests out the door. Bottles clinked as they were knocked over, and chairs scraped against the floor as people scrambled to leave. Within minutes, the house was empty, except for the couple who had started all of this. The husband of the pair had the audacity to approach me. "Look," he began, "we didn't mean for things to get out of hand. We're really sorry, but we've got nowhere else to go. Our landlord kicked us out, and we thought we could stay here for a bit while we figure things out." I stared at him, barely containing my anger. "That's not my problem. You've overstayed your welcome, and you've crossed every possible line. Get out. Now." They tried to argue, but I wasn't listening. My patience had run out. I said, "Out." Defeated, they finally gathered their things and left, muttering apologies that meant nothing to me. Once the door closed behind them, I let out a long breath and looked around at the wreckage. The house was a mess, empty bottles and food wrappers everywhere, sticky floors, and a couch that smelled like spilled beer. I grabbed a trash bag and started cleaning up, too wound up to sit still. As I worked, my mind raced. How had it come to this? How had my home, my life, been turned upside down in such a short amount of time? I couldn't avoid the inevitable confrontation with my wife. She would have to answer for this, for the chaos, for the strangers, for the couple who had so shamelessly imposed on us. And most of all, for keeping me in the dark about everything. Who were these people? What was their story? And why had she let them into our lives without telling me the truth? As I tossed another broken bottle into the trash bag, I knew one thing for certain: we were going to have a serious conversation, and it wouldn't be a pleasant one. I woke up feeling worse than I had the night before. The stress, the lack of sleep, and the disaster of the past few days had finally caught up to me. My head throbbed, and my body felt like it had been put through a meat grinder. I called in sick and decided to take the day to regroup. As I shuffled out of bed, I realized the house was eerily quiet. My wife was nowhere to be found. Her side of the bed was cold, and there was no sign of her in the kitchen or living room. Immediately, suspicion flared. It didn't take much to guess where she might be. I grabbed my phone and called her. It rang a few times before she answered, her voice annoyingly casual. "Hey, I'm at my friend's place. Don't worry, everything's fine. I'll be back soon." Her tone, light and dismissive, only fueled my irritation. "What do you mean, you're at a friend's?" I snapped. "Where exactly have you been all morning? Why didn't you tell me?" She sighed, as if I were the unreasonable one. "Calm down. I'll explain when I get home." And with that, she hung up. My fists clenched around the phone. The audacity of her nonchalance made my blood boil. When she finally arrived, I was ready. I'd spent the morning cleaning up the aftermath of the previous night's disaster, taking photos of the wreckage as proof of how far things had spiraled out of control. I showed her the pictures one by one, laying them out like evidence in a courtroom. "This is what I came home to," I said, my voice ice cold. I expected to find some semblance of normalcy, maybe even a quiet evening. Instead, I walked into chaos. "And where were you?" "Drunk and passed out upstairs. I had to kick out those freeloaders myself." She crossed her arms and frowned. "I noticed. And honestly, that was really mean of you. They needed help, and you threw them out like they were trash. It wasn't fair." Her words struck a nerve. "Not fair?" I repeated, incredulous. "What's not fair is you inviting strangers into our home without my consent. What's not fair is you keeping me in the dark about all of this. And what's definitely not fair is you expecting me to clean up the mess they left behind while you go play savior." She rolled her eyes, clearly unimpressed with my argument. "Fine. You want to know where I was? I was helping them find a new place to stay. And, for your information, they're going to live with my friend now. So there. Problem solved." Her smug tone only irritated me further. "Problem solved?" I asked, incredulous. "You just dumped your problem onto someone else. You've essentially handed your friend a ticking time bomb. Do you even know what kind of trouble you've gotten us into?" She hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Look, you don't understand. I've been talking to them for weeks. They're good people. They just hit a rough patch. I met them on a forum about personal freedom and success. They're working on this amazing course that's going to help so many people. I took their course, and it changed my perspective on life. They said I was great, and we became friends. But they had some issues with their studio, and they needed somewhere to stay while they worked on a new program. That's all this is." I stared at her, dumbfounded. "So let me get this straight," I said slowly. "You took some online course, befriended the instructors, and decided it was a good idea to let them live with us. Without asking me?" She didn't flinch. "Yes. And honestly, I think you're being dramatic about this whole thing. They even offered us a chance to invest in their next course. The returns could be huge." My patience snapped. "Invest? Absolutely not. We're not giving them a single cent. They've done nothing but disrupt our lives since they got here. And another thing," I said, pointing a finger at her, "you're done talking to them. I don't care what they promised or how much you believe in their bullshit. You're cutting ties with them. End of discussion." She glared at me, her expression a mix of anger and disbelief. "You can't just tell me who I can and can't talk to," she said, her voice shaking with defiance. "Watch me," I replied, turning my back on her. The rest of the day passed in icy silence, with her sulking in one corner of the house and me cleaning up the remains of yet another disaster. But no matter how quiet the house became, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. 3 weeks had gone by since the whirlwind of chaos had seemingly subsided. Life had returned to a semblance of normalcy, and I began to feel like the storm might truly be over. The house was quiet, the nights were undisturbed, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could come home and not brace myself for whatever might await me. I found solace in routine, hoping that my wife had finally taken to heart everything we'd argued about. But, as they say, peace is often the prelude to a new storm. One evening, I returned home after a long day at work, ready to enjoy a calm evening. As I walked through the door, I could hear my wife talking on the phone. It wasn't unusual, but something about the tone of her voice caught my attention. She sounded animated, excited even. I called out a quick greeting, which she acknowledged distractedly, then made my way to the bathroom to wash up. As I stood there, scrubbing the grime of the day from my hands, I realized she was still on the phone. The conversation was dragging on longer than usual. A nagging thought crept into my mind. Could it be them again? The couple who had wreaked havoc on our lives not so long ago? I shook my head, trying to dismiss the idea. Surely she wouldn't make the same mistake twice. Surely she had learned her lesson. But as the minutes ticked by and the conversation showed no signs of ending, my unease grew. I finished washing up and headed back to the living room, determined to get some answers. Just as I entered the room, she hung up the phone. Her eye sparkled with an intensity one hadn't seen in weeks. Before I could say a word, she turned to me with a wide grin and said, "You won't believe this. I've had so much time to think over the past few weeks, and I've realized something. The reason I've been feeling so stuck lately, like I'm in a rut, is because I haven't been working." I raised an eyebrow, unsure of where this was going. "Of course," I said. "That's what I've been saying. Things would be a lot easier if you had a job. It's good for structure, purpose, and, well, the finances." She nodded eagerly, as if she had come to this revelation all on her own. "Exactly. And guess what? My friend just offered me a job. She's coming over tomorrow to explain everything." This caught me off guard. "A job?" I asked, cautiously optimistic. "What kind of job?" She shrugged, clearly unbothered by the lack of specifics. She didn't go into a lot of detail, but it's remote, and the hours are super flexible. Sometimes I'd have to go to the office, but only to submit reports or meet deadlines. It's perfect, don't you think? I wanted to feel relieved, but the vagueness of it all set off alarm bells in my head. Still, I decided not to jump to conclusions. "I guess that depends on what it actually entails," I said. "When she comes over tomorrow, we'll hear her out and see what she has to say." My wife's enthusiasm didn't waver. "It's going to be great," she insisted. "I'm finally going to have something meaningful to do. And you'll see, this is going to be a game changer for both of us." I gave her a tight-lipped smile, still feeling skeptical but unwilling to burst her bubble just yet. "All right," I said, nodding slowly. "Okay, let's see what your friend has to say tomorrow. Go ahead and invite her over. We'll take it from there." Despite my reservations, I knew there was no point in arguing about something that hadn't even been fully explained yet. For now, I'd play along, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than she was letting on. That day was one of my rare days off, and I decided to make the most of it. My wife and I spent the morning tidying up the house and preparing for her friend's visit. She was clearly excited, going out of her way to make everything perfect. I, on the other hand, approached the situation with cautious optimism. While I was glad she was finally considering work, I couldn't ignore the nagging doubts in the back of my mind. By early afternoon, the house was spotless, the table was set, and we were ready for her friend's arrival. The doorbell rang right on time. I opened the door, and there she was, the same woman who had housed that troublesome couple weeks ago. My stomach tightened instinctively, but I kept my face neutral. She greeted us warmly and stepped inside, looking far more composed than during our last encounter. My wife, practically beaming, ushered her into the living room, and we all sat down to chat. The initial conversation was polite and light, mostly small talk. I waited patiently, eager to get to the real reason for her visit. At one point, I couldn't help but bring up the elephant in the room. "So, about that couple who was staying with you," I began, careful to keep my tone casual. "How's that situation going?" She didn't hesitate. "Oh, I kicked them out weeks ago," she said firmly. "They were not what I expected. Don't worry, they're not my problem anymore." Her answer was straightforward and logical enough to put me at ease. If nothing else, it seemed like she had learned her lesson about letting them overstay their welcome. With that out of the way, she shifted the conversation to the real purpose of her visit, explaining the job she had offered my wife. She laid out the responsibilities in detail, describing how my wife would be working remotely to process applications in their system. Occasionally, she would need to visit the office to submit reports and handle payroll tasks, but most of the work could be done from the comfort of home. The pay structure sounded fair, with a base salary plus a percentage of sales. As far as I could tell, it seemed legitimate. I glanced at my wife, who was hanging on every word. She looked thrilled, and I could see the enthusiasm in her eyes. "That sounds great," I said cautiously. "And everything's above board?" Her friend smiled reassuringly. "Of course. We've been running this for years. It's a great opportunity, and I think she'll be fantastic at it." My wife nodded eagerly, clearly ready to dive in. I decided not to press further. "All right then. Sounds like you've got yourself a deal," I said. From that day forward, my wife's work began. She threw herself into it with surprising enthusiasm, setting up her workspace and diving into the tasks assigned to her. For the first time in a while, she seemed genuinely energized and purposeful. I watched from the sidelines, silently relieved to see her so engaged. The house felt different, too, calmer, more focused. It was a welcome change. About a week into her new job, she approached me with another bit of news. "They're having a little office party next week," she said, her tone light and cheerful. "It's just a small gathering to celebrate some milestones. I'll need to go into the office for it." I nodded, seeing no harm in it. "All right. Sounds reasonable. I might be late getting home that day, though, so don't wait up for me." She smiled, clearly unfazed by my potential absence. "That's fine," she said. "Actually, they're planning something special for me at the party. A little surprise. So don't worry if I'm out late, okay? Everything's going to be great." Her excitement was infectious, but a small part of me couldn't help but wonder what kind of surprise they had in store. Still, I nodded and said, "All right. Have fun, and let me know how it goes." She kissed me on the cheek and walked away, humming to herself, leaving me to hope that this new chapter in her life would finally bring some stability to ours. The day began like any other. I was at work, focused on the usual tasks, when I received a notification on my phone that made my stomach drop. Nearly all the money in my bank account had been withdrawn. I stared at the screen in disbelief, refreshing the app repeatedly in the hope that it was some sort of glitch. But the numbers didn't change. Panic quickly set in. What the hell was going on? I excused myself from a meeting, called my bank, and they confirmed that the transactions had gone through. It wasn't a mistake. I immediately informed my boss that I needed to leave. Fortunately, he's an understanding guy and didn't ask too many questions. I jumped in my car and drove home as fast as I legally could, my mind racing with possibilities. Was it fraud? Had my account been hacked? Or was it something worse? By the time I pulled into the driveway, I was on edge, prepared for the worst but still hoping for some rational explanation. As soon as I opened the door, my worst fears were realized. There, in our bedroom, was my wife. And she wasn't alone. That man from the infamous couple was with her, both of them caught in the act. My world seemed to tilt as rage surged through me. I pulled out my phone and started recording, not trusting myself to speak without evidence of what I was seeing. My wife screamed at me to stop, but I didn't. I needed proof. Proof for what, I didn't yet know, but I knew I needed it. I put the phone down and reached into the drawer of the bedside table, where I kept my firearm for emergencies. The situation was escalating quickly, but my actions felt oddly deliberate, almost automatic. I pointed the gun at the man, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "What the hell are you doing in my house?" I demanded. He stammered, his hands up in a show of surrender, while my wife tried to intervene. "Put it down," she begged. "You don't understand." But before anyone could calm the situation, the man made a sudden move toward me. My reflexes took over, and I fired. The bullet hit him in the stomach, and he collapsed onto the floor, groaning in pain. The sound of the shot rang through the house, leaving a deafening silence in its wake. My wife screamed, her hands covering her mouth, as I reached for my phone to call the police. Within minutes, officers and paramedics arrived, and the man was rushed to the hospital under police supervision. They took my statement, confiscated my firearm, and assured me the situation would be thoroughly investigated. When the chaos settled and we were alone, I turned to my wife, my anger boiling over. "What the hell were you thinking?" I shouted. She tried to compose herself, but her voice trembled as she spoke. "Before you judge me, just listen," she said. "I want to be honest with you. I've been unfaithful. Not just with him, but with others. 6 others, to be exact. And I realize that I can't stop. It's something I enjoy, something I need. That's why I'm proposing we open our marriage." I stared at her, stunned. My mind couldn't process the words coming out of her mouth. Open our marriage? After everything she had done? "Get out," I said coldly. She blinked, clearly surprised by my lack of reaction. "Take your things and get out of my house. Now." To my shock, she didn't argue. She calmly packed a bag, walked out the door, and left without so much as a backward glance. Once she was gone, I locked every door and window in the house, ensuring no one could disturb the fragile solitude I had reclaimed. My thoughts were a chaotic mess, but I knew one thing: I needed a break from all of this. I called my boss and explained the situation, requesting some time off. He agreed without hesitation, offering his support and understanding. Next, I called the bank to block my account and prevent any further unauthorized transactions. The representative assured me they'd investigate the withdrawals, but it would take time. As I hung up the phone, the weight of the day finally crashed down on me. Exhausted and emotionally drained, I fell onto the couch and closed my eyes. For now, there was nothing more I could do. Tomorrow, I would pick up the pieces and figure out how to move forward. But tonight, all I could do was try to get some rest. The next morning, I woke up feeling slightly more composed, though the events of the previous day still weighed heavily on me. My house was quiet, eerily so, but for once, I welcomed the silence. As I moved around, trying to put my thoughts in order, my eyes landed on her laptop. She had left it on the dining table, a glaring reminder of her presence despite her absence. Curiosity, or perhaps desperation, got the better of me. I sat down, opened the lid, and watched the screen come to life. I had no idea what I was about to uncover. The desktop was cluttered with folders and icons, but one stood out immediately: the program she had been using for her so-called job. I clicked on it, and within seconds, the truth began to unravel. It was the course she had mentioned, the one created by that insufferable couple. The realization hit me like a freight train. My hands shook as I navigated through the files, each click revealing more evidence of deceit. This wasn't just a harmless job, it was a well-organized scam, and my wife had been deeply involved. As I delved deeper, I found a folder filled with chat logs and emails. Reading through them, I pieced together the full extent of the betrayal. The couple hadn't been kicked out by her friend as I had been led to believe. On the contrary, her friend had been a willing participant in their schemes. Together, they had formed a group to orchestrate this scam, recruiting others and building a network of deception. My wife's role? Processing applications and, worse, accessing people's financial information. The very thought made my stomach churn. One email thread caught my attention. It was a conversation between my wife, the couple, and her friend. They discussed their plans openly, even brazenly. The tone was celebratory, as if they were proud of their deceit. They joked about how easily people fell for their pitches and how lucrative the operation had become. And then I saw it, a message about me. They had planned for her to leave me eventually, but not before she drained as much money as she could from me. My jaw tightened as I read their cold, calculated words. The audacity was staggering. The pieces of the puzzle started to fall into place. The unexplained withdrawals from my account, the secrecy, and her sudden interest in this so-called job, it all made sense now. Further digging revealed client information, including bank details that had been used for fraudulent charges. My wife had memorized my account details, using our trusted devices to authorize transactions without raising suspicion. It was a scheme so audacious that I almost couldn't believe it was real. What angered me most was the sheer arrogance of it all. They had left a digital trail, as if they were untouchable. Chat logs, spreadsheets, even screenshots of their victims' account information were neatly stored on her laptop. It was as if they hadn't considered the possibility of being caught. Her carelessness became their undoing. She had been so preoccupied with her newfound life of deceit and infidelity that she hadn't even bothered to clean up after herself. Every file, every message, was there, waiting to be discovered. As I closed the laptop, my anger turned to resolve. This wasn't just about me anymore. They had hurt countless others, and it was time for them to face the consequences. I picked up my phone and called my attorney. Thankfully, he picked up on the first ring. I explained everything as succinctly as I could, detailing the scam, the financial theft, and the evidence I had found. He listened intently, his tone growing more serious with every word. "We need to meet," he said firmly. "Bring everything you have." I agreed and set a time for later that day. As I hung up the phone, I glanced back at the laptop, its screen dark now, but still a glaring reminder of everything that had been lost. My marriage, my trust, my financial security, all of it had been shattered by the very person who should have protected it. But as devastating as it was, I knew one thing: this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a fight to take back what was mine and to ensure they never did this to anyone else again. Once all the evidence had been gathered, the pieces fell into place with startling clarity. My attorney and I worked tirelessly to build a solid case against the scam operation. The evidence from the laptop, combined with financial records and witness statements, painted a damning picture of their activities. We presented everything to the authorities, and it didn't take long for them to act. The wheels of justice turned quickly, fueled by the overwhelming amount of proof we had. One of the key players, the man from the couple, was still in the hospital recovering from his injury. The police wasted no time interrogating him once we filed charges. Cornered and unable to deny the mountain of evidence against him, he cracked under pressure. During his confession, he laid out their entire operation, implicating my wife, her friend, and the rest of the group. His statements aligned perfectly with the information we had uncovered, solidifying the case even further. Their plan had been simple yet bold: wait for the man to recover, then disappear before anyone could catch them. They had underestimated me, assuming I'd stay silent or move on. Instead, my determination to hold them accountable caught them off guard. Their overconfidence proved to be their undoing, and within days, warrants were issued for everyone involved. Police apprehended the remaining members of the group, including my wife's so-called friend, who had been instrumental in coordinating their scams. The fallout was swift and severe. My wife, now under arrest, was granted one phone call. Of all people, she chose to call me. When I picked up, I was met with an angry tirade. She screamed about how terrible I was for betraying her, for not letting her go, and ruining her life. The irony was almost too much to bear. Here was the woman who had cheated on me, stolen my money, and participated in a scam that hurt countless others, now playing the victim. I didn't let her finish. I hung up, her curses still ringing in my ears. It was a small, petty victory, but one I didn't regret. With her in custody, I turned my focus to the next step: divorce. My attorney guided me through the process, and with the evidence we had, it was a relatively straightforward case. The court had no trouble granting me the upper hand. The recordings, the financial proof, and the blatant betrayal all worked in my favor. Because my wife had never held a steady job and most of our assets had been acquired before the marriage, I retained ownership of the house, the car, and the majority of our finances. The divorce was finalized quickly, leaving me free to rebuild my life. My ex-wife's situation, however, was far less fortunate. As the trial for the scam unfolded, it became clear that while she and her friend were deeply involved, their lawyers managed to secure lighter sentences for them. They argued that my wife and her friend were not fully aware of the scale of the scam, painting them as gullible participants rather than masterminds. The judge granted them conditional sentences and ankle monitors, ensuring they couldn't leave their homes without permission. It was frustrating to see them evade harsher punishment, but at least they were marked by their actions. The couple, however, wasn't so lucky. Their role as the orchestrators of the operation left no room for leniency. The evidence, combined with their hospital confession, sealed their fate. They were sentenced to significant prison time, ensuring they wouldn't have the chance to exploit anyone else for years to come. Watching them face justice was a moment of vindication, a small measure of closure after months of chaos. As the courtroom drama ended, I allowed myself a moment to breathe. It felt like the end of a long, grueling chapter. Yet, even as I walked away from the courthouse, a nagging feeling lingered. Something about the way my ex-wife had calmly accepted her ankle monitor, about the way her friend avoided eye contact during sentencing, unsettled me. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't truly over. They had escaped full accountability, and I suspected they wouldn't stay idle for long. The couple's imprisonment brought some relief, but it also left me wary. I knew how cunning they had been to build their operation in the first place, and I couldn't help but wonder what else they might have set in motion. As much as I wanted to move on, the shadow of their actions still loomed over me. And so, while one chapter had closed, another seemed poised to begin. Some time had passed, and my life had finally begun to settle into a new rhythm. I had moved on, found a wonderful new girlfriend, and taken the necessary steps to rebuild my sense of security. One of the first things I did was change the locks on my house, ensuring that any remnants of my old life couldn't slip back in uninvited. Things were good, stable even, and I dared to think that chapter of chaos was firmly behind me. Then, one evening, there was an unexpected knock at the door. I opened it to find my ex-wife standing there, no longer wearing the ankle monitor that had kept her tethered for months. She wasted no time launching into demands, claiming that since the house was once ours, she had every right to move back in. I didn't let her get far. "Get lost," I said firmly. "I've proven in court that this house is mine. Besides, I've moved on. I've got someone new, so why don't you find your way back to your lover in prison?" My words hit their mark. Her face twisted in fury as I calmly shut the door in her face. For several minutes, she pounded on the door, shouting obscenities and threats. My girlfriend, understandably shaken, stood by my side, uncertain of what might happen next. I reassured her, staying close until the commotion subsided. Eventually, my ex-wife's persistence wore out, and she stormed off into the night. The sound of her retreating footsteps was a relief, though the tension lingered in the air. From that day forward, my ex-wife didn't return. It was as if she finally understood that she no longer had any power over me or my life. My girlfriend and I continued to build our future together, leaving the shadows of the past firmly behind us. The peace that followed was something I cherished deeply, a reminder that no matter how turbulent life becomes, it is possible to move forward and find happiness again.
I exposed my cheating wife and reclaimed my life after finding her betrayal in our marriage. Many dream of owning their own island, often picturing it in the warm Caribbean or South Pacific. Gananoque, a small town on the St. Lawrence River in Ontario, Canada, is part of the Thousand Islands region where both Canadians and Americans live on these islands. Some have castles, and dollar for dollar, these islands rival any in the world, despite being in the St. Lawrence River instead of the tropics. One popular story about the Thousand Islands involves salad dressing, supposedly invented by a local woman and later given to a New York hotel around 1890, though there's no written proof of this. I used to drive trucks for a living, delivering across the contiguous 48 states and Canada for a medium-sized company with about 100 trucks. Drivers could choose between long hauls, regional routes, or local transport. After a long trip of a week or more, we could opt to stay local for a week to spend time with family or go back on longer trips. Sometimes we could even take our wives on the road. Most trucking companies that operate nationwide and in Canada keep their drivers on the road for weeks, impacting family life. Several professions strain families, with the military being the toughest, followed by trucking and law enforcement. I worked construction during high school summers, so it was natural to start working full-time after graduation. By age 23, I was a skilled carpenter. At 19, I met Julie Simpson, an office clerk at a commercial bakery, and we married at 21. We were happy until the banking and construction industries faced severe losses. Julie and I decided I should try truck driving for better pay, despite the drawback of being away from home. The company offered to pay for my truck driving school if I committed to a year with them. After getting my Class A CDL, 3 weeks later, I was accepted and paired with an experienced driving instructor who taught me the ropes of handling loaded trailers weighing 16 to 36 tons. Scheduled for weeks with my instructor, I convinced the safety department I was ready in 4. After a week in the city and another on local roads, everything went smoothly. I arranged for Julie to collect my paycheck on Fridays from the office, which worked well. After months while finishing up a week of local driving, my dispatcher, Shirley, offered a good opportunity. I had cargo heading to Vancouver with a return load to Montreal, or rather, to Gananoque. The young company owner, just a few years older than me, had recently bought one of the Thousand Islands, complete with 2 houses. He wanted the main house furnished with handcrafted furniture from Vancouver Island. Although the furniture wouldn't be ready for a month, the operations department decided to surprise him with an early delivery. Here's the deal. You can't tell anyone. Not even his wife. I'm not saying she'll spill the beans, but since she comes for your paycheck, she might say something to the wrong person. The boss and his wife will be there next weekend around the time you get back. Or you'll head to Vancouver, get loaded up, and then return. Is this something you'd be interested in? Before I could respond, she interrupted. Remember, whether you accept or not, you can't tell anyone. Do you promise? I accept and promise not to tell anyone, I said. Good. Since you took it, and because I like you, have you seen that brand new Peterbilt in the yard? He asked. Of course I saw it, I replied. Well, it's yours. Load your things into it. Your cargo is in trailer 2353. You can leave in the morning. Call me when you get to Vancouver and be careful, he instructed. I went home and told Julie about my upcoming trip to the West Coast. She didn't mind the good pay, but we both disliked my nearly 2-week absence. To make up for it, we cherished our night together. Lovemaking with Julie was always special. She was always eager for anything. Early in my trucking days, we took unclothed photos so I could take her with me whenever I drove to Canada. Her photos stayed in a bag on my seat, never checked during the thorough border searches. After the first time, leaving was simple, crossing the border routine with courteous Canadian officials. During the search, Shirley called. The boss's furniture was ready, brought from the island that day. Unloading and loading took hours. Then I headed back east, fully loaded, returning via Detroit. The drive to Montreal took about 9 hours. In Kingston, I parked overnight and called Shirley at 6 a.m. We loaded a barge for the island. The path was straightforward but slow. The forested island led to the guest house where I unexpectedly found my wife with the boss, her bosom being rubbed with what I assumed was sunscreen. As I approached, I realized it was indeed sunscreen, but she wasn't his wife, she was mine. They were caught off guard. I spoke to them briefly, then turned away without hearing their response. Back at the dock, realizing I was on an island, I noticed several boats moored there. Taking a boat was my only way back. With some basic knowledge from TV and movies, I found keys, started a boat, and hurried back to town, damaging it slightly on arrival. The boat drifted away as I left for Kingston Airport, buying a ticket for a flight to New York. Julie had left one message on my ringing phone. "Please call me back," her message read. I called Shirley. "Good morning, Scott. Did you succeed?" she asked. "How long, Shirley?" I demanded. "How long for what?" she replied, confused. "How long has he been sleeping with my wife?" I questioned. "What are you talking about? My God, is she there? Is she all right?" Shirley responded, panicked. "About months. Sorry, Scott. His wife had to be there. Otherwise, I would never have sent you," she admitted. "So you would send me somewhere, knowing the boss was having lovemaking with my wife? Who else knows?" I pressed. "Just Joey and me," she confessed. "Thank you, Shirley, thank you very much," I said sarcastically. "Wait, where are you? What are you going to do?" "Wait, he's on the other line, I'll be right back," she said urgently. "Freak you," I muttered, ending the call. Now I understand why she didn't want me to tell Julie about the trip. She would have told Bradley, ruining the surprise, especially the one he just had. It was a small airport, and I could see everything and everyone coming and going. I kept looking to see if she or he would show up, but they didn't. The flight was short. After landing, I rented a car and drove 4 hours home. She wasn't there. I couldn't stop thinking about what I would do on the drive home. My phone rang again and she left another message. "Scott, if you're home, I'm on my way. Please don't do anything until I arrive, and we can talk. We never had lovemaking, Scott. We just fooled around. Please believe me. They never had lovemaking." Jesus Christ, did she really think I was that stupid? At our apartment, I loaded my pickup truck with everything I wanted, walked over to the terminal, and calmly went to work. Shirley and Joey were there. Neither of them looked at me when they saw it was me. "How much money do you owe me, Shirley?" I demanded. "Scott, she began. "Write me a check for everything the company owes me now," I insisted. "Sorry, Scott, Mr. Bradley said not to give you anything until he talked to you," she explained. "Surely you owe me." "Thank you very much," I replied curtly. "He said you crashed one of his boats," she added. "What else did he say? Was he bragging about sleeping with my wife? Did you all have a good laugh at my expense? Julie came here and told you to keep me off the road as long as possible. Write me a check, Shirley, or I'll wreck this whole damn office," I threatened. It took her a couple of minutes to figure out what I was owed. She called accounting and told them to write me a check. I went to the accounting department. They had everything ready for me. I looked at it. "I changed my mind. Transfer it to my card, please," I requested. "But Scott—" "Direct deposit," they hesitated. "Now please," I insisted. I gave them my card number and they did it. Bradley wouldn't be able to stop the direct deposit payment. Then I went to Bradley's house. One day we had been there on a picnic. My wife was probably there for more than just picnics. Mrs. Bradley opened the door. She looked and acted like she was sick. "What can I do for you?" she asked. "My name is Scott, man, and I used to drive for your husband this morning. I delivered furniture to your island and found your husband massaging my wife's bare bosom with one hand while the other wandered below the waist. I thought you should know." "Have a good day," I said. "Wait a minute, mister. What did you say your name was?" she asked. "Man, Scott, man," I replied. "What is your wife's name?" she inquired. "Julie, man," I answered. "Did you see this morning?" she pressed. "With my own eyes," I confirmed. "Are you sure?" she asked again. "Lady, of course I'm sure." "Do you really think I would make something like that up about my own wife?" I retorted. I walked to my truck and drove off, not knowing where I was going. I headed to my parents' house and quickly brought them up to speed. Mom always had coffee ready and offered me a cup. I took it and soon stretched out on the sofa. I closed my eyes. The next thing I remember, I heard my father's voice. "Julie, get off my porch or I'll call the police," he commanded. "But I need to talk to Scott," she pleaded. "After what you did to him?" Dad asked. "No way, but he doesn't understand," she protested. "Oh, I think he understands perfectly. You slept with his boss for 3 months. What's so hard to understand?" Dad responded. "But he doesn't know why," she insisted. "Of course, he knows you're a traitor, that's why. Now get off my porch," he demanded. She started screaming my name. "Scott, talk to me, please. Scott, give me a chance to explain. Scott! Scott!" It had been a long day, and soon I fell asleep again. The next morning, I woke up early and walked to my truck. I still didn't know where I was going, but I had to go somewhere. I opened the door to sit down, and Julie was sleeping across the seat. She sat up when she heard the door open. I started to walk away, but she grabbed my hand and pulled me back. "Please, Scott, listen to me. I had no choice," she pleaded. "You either let someone have lovemaking with you or you don't, right, Julie?" I asked. "Everything was wrong," she admitted. "So you had lovemaking voluntarily?" I stated, not questioned. "Scott, just give me a chance," she begged. "I repeat, you had lovemaking voluntarily," I reiterated. "Okay, I had lovemaking voluntarily, but besides, you lied. We never had lovemaking, we just played around a little," she tried to downplay. God, did you really expect me to believe that? "Get out of my truck," I demanded. She didn't budge, so I took her hand and pulled her outside. Furious, I drove off before she could get up. I went to a fast food restaurant for breakfast. I ordered, took the food to a table, and ate. When I finished, I went to the bank and split our money. My phone rang several times and several people left messages. My former employer, Ernest T. Bradley, left too. "Call me and let's talk, or I'll sue you for crashing my boat, and then you'll go to jail for threatening my employees, and don't think I won't do it." That was his first message. "Listen, I slept with your wife, deal with it. This happens every day. She's not the first wife I've spent time with, and she won't be the last. Swallow your pride, take her back, and punish her if necessary. That's what she likes and wants. If you don't, maybe I'll keep doing it. Now get back here and drive my truck home, or I'll report you for theft. Plus you owe me 3 more months to pay for your truck driving school." That was his second message. God, what an idiot. So he was still in Canada. I called his wife to see if I could meet her instead of just rushing to his house again. She agreed, and I played his messages for her. She had been sick before, but after hearing him, she felt worse. "At first I wasn't sure I believed you, but now I do. I'm going to make his life hell." "May I have a copy of this message, Mrs. Bradley?" she asked. We made a copy for her. "What are you going to do with your wife?" she inquired. "Divorce, of course. I just don't know how to approach it," I replied. "It's simple," she said. "Find a good lawyer and hire him." It sounded so simple. I left her house and returned to my parents. They also asked what I planned to do. I told them the same thing I told Mrs. Bradley. My father then repeated, word for word, what she had told me. They convinced me, so I started looking for a lawyer. Again, I had no idea where to start, so I began with the letter A in the phone book. I got to D before I found my lawyer, David Dennison, and we hit it off right away. His entire family, including himself, were truck drivers until he flipped his car and was paralyzed from the waist down. He graduated from law school in a wheelchair. He was the only member of his family not in the trucking business, but they all knew and respected Ernest T. Bradley. Dennison noted several times Bradley's youth and business acumen. In fact, everyone who knew him respected him. He was famous in society. He sponsored sports teams, arts programs, and donated to every charity that came his way. Dennison flat out refused to believe me when I first told him what I had discovered in Canada. He was on Bradley's side, and I was almost ready to leave and find another lawyer, but I decided to play the messages for him. He finally began to believe me. "Wow, this will shake up the community if it gets out. How do you want to handle this privately or make a big splash?" Dennis asked. "All I want is to get a divorce as cheaply as possible. From what I understand, this will never make it into the newspapers. The reason for the divorce will be infidelity. If that means it goes all over town, so be it. But there won't be any lies about irreconcilable differences. She cheated, and it will be recorded," I explained. "It can be difficult if that message is all you have. Courts today almost require visual evidence, especially when accusing a man of his stature," Dennis cautioned. "Well, let's try it," I decided. "Fine, we will serve her the documents in the next few days. Do you know where she might be?" he asked. "Either at work at the bakery, at home, or in Canada with him, I guess," I replied. "Of course, we can't serve documents to her in Canada, so we'll try at home or work," he noted. "That works for me. You can contact me by mobile or at my parents'," I said. I was tired of living with my parents, so I spent the next few days looking for my own apartment. I found one that wasn't the fanciest or best in town, but it was mine. A week later, Julie was served at work. My father owned a small welding shop. I never had any interest or inclination towards welding, but that started to change. He convinced me to come work for him just to get me out of my apartment. Both he and my mother thought I spent too much time indoors. I thought about working for another transport company, but I wasn't too enthusiastic about it, so I went to the welding shop. My dad had a pickup truck with portable welding equipment, and basically all he did was fix things. Sometimes a client would ask for something special, and my father would prepare it. Julie tried to talk to me several times, but after she was served, everything went through our lawyers. Our first meeting was about a month after she was served. Her lawyer, of course, tried to get the infidelity charge thrown out. I categorically refused. Bradley was named in the divorce petition, and Julie desperately didn't want his name to appear anywhere near the divorce suit for infidelity. This could ruin his reputation in society, she objected. I exploded. Are you serious? He's a wife-stealing slug and should be exposed to the public, Julie intervened. If you had treated your wife better, he wouldn't have been able to steal her. This led to a quarrel between us, which could only be stopped by placing us in separate rooms. After we cooled down and were back in the same room, she again tried to get me to remove his name. I'm not going to do this, so forget about it. Why are you trying so hard to protect him? Are you planning to marry him? Are you still sleeping with him? FYI, he and I are still dating, so yes, I'm still sleeping with him. Her lawyer simply laid his head on the table and groaned, and without lifting it, he spoke. You just admitted to your husband and 2 BFFs that you committed infidelity. This is probably the worst thing you could do at this point. I don't care, she said. Then to me, answering your other question, yes, I'm going to marry him as soon as he gets divorced. So, you think he loves you? I asked. Certainly. I put my phone on the table and scrolled through his message to her. That's not what he said. He's just playing you. Mr. Dennison chuckled as he pulled an envelope from his briefcase and slid it across the table to Julie. Her lawyer intercepted it, opened it, and reviewed the contents, a note and a series of photos. Julie examined the photos first, then read the note aloud. Mr. Mann, these may help with your divorce. The first 5 were taken on the island weeks ago with his hairdresser's wife. The next 6 were from last week when I was away. He picked up a woman at a bar. It was just another fling like your wife. The note signed, Cynthia. The photos showed Bradley with the 2 women in various stages of undress or in carnal positions, leaving no doubt about their affair. Julie pushed the photos back and left the room, not to be seen until court, where they split everything, money, jewelry, china, and her clothes. She stayed in their apartment. Bradley's reputation tanked swiftly. His sports teams folded, and Cynthia received half of everything, including their home and half the moving company. He only kept the Canadian island because she didn't want it. He billed my lawyer for truck driving school, claiming breach of contract, met with a colorful response from Mr. Dennison. Cynthia called to disregard it, offering me an operations manager job at a trucking company, tempting, but refused. Over time, I discovered a knack for metalwork thanks to Dad's guidance. Dating came and went, rarely lasting. Bradley's business sold, and Cynthia disappeared. He occasionally surfaced but didn't recognize me from our time together. I found joy welding and crafting metal goods in the shop, like weather vanes and mailbox stands. On a quiet Sunday, Julie visited, seeking conversation. Can we talk? She asked. I have nothing to say, just listen, she explained. I've no excuse. We had a good life, money, love, so why Bradley? Partly his lies about you being away, mistreatment. He said every trucker strays, I believed, surely fed it. Said Bradley treated me well. Mrs. Bradley supposedly is flings to improve marriage, all lies, but I fell for it. Now I know better. I sat quietly and listened. When I thought she had calmed down, I spoke. Why are you telling me all this now? I don't know. I don't think I ever really wanted to tell you this. At least, not the truth. I didn't want you to know how foolish I was. I always thought I'd come up with a story where it was all your fault, and I came up with a few jokes, but I couldn't bring myself to tell you any of them. This afternoon, driving past your store, I saw you here and stopped. I didn't know what I was going to say, just that I had to say something if you'd let me, but what I said turned out to be the truth. What did you hope to gain from this? I asked. Just for you to know that none of this was your fault. These were all my own selfish desires and the fabricated scenarios he created for me. I also wanted you to know that whether you believe it or not, I never stopped loving you, she replied. That's where I think you're lying. I don't think you can truly love someone and lie or cheat on them. You did both. You even wanted to marry him, if I remember correctly. Are you still seeing him? I challenged. I can't explain it any better than I have already, and I won't try to make you believe me. And no, I'm not with him. I haven't seen him since the day in the lawyer's office when I saw those photographs, she responded. She sat silently for a few more moments, watching me work. I guess I should go, she finally said, standing up. Scott. I looked at her. Is there any way I could forgive you enough to give you another chance? She asked. I shook my head. You know where the door is, I replied. After she left, I reflected on my ex-boss and ex-wife, confirming my thoughts about them. I wondered what would have happened if I hadn't surprised my boss on the island. Would I still be trucking, settling for what was left? I chose to make weather vanes and take the risk of going broke. One day, a flyer for a Renaissance festival arrived. I'd never heard of it before and learned Maryland claims jousting and lacrosse as official sports. Curious, I attended the festival nearby. There, I saw vendors selling armor, swords, and more. Inspired, I researched and crafted shields and swords, then sold them at festivals across the country. Teddy Wickoff helped me sell my items, marking the start of a new business. I continued making and selling swords and shields, gaining momentum. During this time, I took on a challenging repair job for Mr. James. James damaged his gate. Despite initial doubts, I completed the task with help from his daughter, Hannah, who brought me iced tea and kept me company as we bonded over the project. I developed a keen interest in armor making, pondering its profitability while dating a woman I met at the library. Our relationship ended abruptly. Later, at a cinema, I unexpectedly encountered Hannah with her boyfriend, hearing her voice within minutes of their arrival. "If you touch me there again, I'll cut off your balls." His hand dropped from her shoulder. Irritated, she left, and her boyfriend pleaded for her to return. I followed them. To her credit, she didn't tolerate his behavior. I wasn't close enough to hear, but they were arguing about something. I decided to intervene, something I'd never done before. "Excuse me, Hannah, are you okay?" I asked. She looked at me, taking a moment to recognize me. "No, that guy has more arms than an octopus, and I'm tired of fighting him off. Can you give me a ride home?" "Sure," I agreed. As we headed to my truck, another guy approached. "Hannah, are you okay?" he asked. "Now I am, yes," she replied. "Do you want me to take you home?" he offered. Without even looking at me, she said yes, and they headed to his car without saying goodbye to me as if I weren't there at all. I stood there watching them drive off, shook my head, and went home. A few days later, I was at her house again. There were some railings along the walkway that needed attention, so Mr. Jameson asked me to return. Hannah saw me and came over to say hello, but didn't mention the movie incident. I was a bit annoyed at being completely ignored at the cinema and wasn't in the mood to chat. She took the hint and left. I returned the next day with spare parts. It was a standard railing, so parts were readily available. As she headed towards the pool, Hannah stopped to chat. I mostly ignored her. I enjoyed our conversations while working on the gate, but after the theater incident, not so much. "Are you mad at me?" she asked. "Do you remember what happened at the movies last week?" I replied. "You mean with the octopus guy?" she replied. "Yes, I confirmed." "What about it?" she asked. "You asked me to give you a ride home. Do you remember that?" I pressed. "Of course," she answered. "What happened after that?" I inquired. "Nothing. Jimmy showed up and took me home," she said. "And you didn't see anything wrong with that?" I asked. "No, was there?" she responded, confused. "Not if you didn't see anything, I guess," I said, grabbing a hammer and started making noise with the metal, hoping she'd take the hint and leave. It didn't make sense, I thought. "Yeah," she was getting impatient. "I don't get you," she said. I looked her in the eye. "That's the problem," I stated. I resumed hammering. She got the message and left. The rest of the day was spent finishing the railings. My interest in armor grew, and I researched its construction extensively. I crafted my first piece and felt proud of it. I sent a photo to Teddy to get his opinion. "Stick with shields and swords," he advised, laughing. "You're good at that. Our armor requires a lot more work to sell." A few days later, I was at a local bar watching a baseball game when Hannah sat down next to me. "I'm meeting friends for a drink. Want to join us?" she asked. "No thanks, I'm good here," I replied. She got up to leave but hesitated. She looked at me. "Are you ever going to tell me what I did to make you mad? If I have to explain it, I feel sorry for you." "Enjoy your drinks," I said. I finished my beer and was about to leave when she returned. "Oh my God, Scott, I didn't mean to ignore you in the theater. That guy made me so angry I didn't know what I was doing. Please accept my apologies," she pleaded. I assumed someone at her table overheard our conversation and corrected her. "Apologies accepted," I said. She smiled. "Will you join us now? Please, let us just have a drink. I owe you at least this," I smiled back. "Sure, thank you." They all drank, and the evening turned out to be enjoyable. Two of them, whose names I don't recall, reminded Hannah of her manners throughout the evening. I felt sympathetic towards her. The group eventually dispersed, and we all departed. I left with Jenny. I sat next to her at the table and inquired about Hannah. She informed me they had been friends for a long time. Look, Scott, I'm not her best friend, but we're close. There's something about you she likes. She regrets how she treated you. She told the whole table that, Jenny explained. She told you have to give her credit for that. Do you have her number? I asked. No, Jenny replied. Give me your phone, I said. I handed it over and she entered Hannah's number. Give her a call, she suggested. The following week, one morning at the store, Hannah walked in. I assumed she got the address from her father. Did you have fun last time? I enjoyed it. I like your friends, I said. That's good, but what about me? Do you like me? I remember you apologized, she replied. I remember, I acknowledged. Then why aren't we friends? She asked. I smiled. I think we're working on it. An apology doesn't automatically mean friendship. It means you realize you made a mistake and regret it. That's why you apologize. The person may or may not accept it. I accepted yours, but that doesn't mean we'll be best friends. It just means I acknowledge you understand what you did and feel sorry for it, assuming your apology was sincere. It was, she assured. I believe you, I said. Good, so let's go out to dinner, she proposed. I chuckled. Why not? It'll be a good step in building our friendship, she added. All right, when? I asked. How about tonight? She suggested. And so it was. Hannah and I had dinner, and our friendship blossomed. We dated for 2 months before becoming physical, engaged, but that was just the beginning. Our relationship thrived, and soon we wanted to spend all our time together. She'd visit the store just to be with me, and we both cherished that time. I could work while she read, and we didn't always need to talk or interact. Just being there for each other was enough. During a late-night conversation in bed, I learned she'd been married briefly. However, she surprised me by revealing Jonah Jameson wasn't her biological father. She and her mother were married for only 7 years. She had an older brother, and their father passed away 2 years after their mother married Jameson. Their father owned a trucking company, and her brother Ernest wanted to take over and manage it. He was 6 years older than Hannah, and many doubted his youthfulness. However, Hannah and her mother agreed to let him try. He proved capable, and the company prospered. I got out of bed, poured us drinks, and returned. Tell me about your brother, I asked. I've told you most of it, the important parts anyway. The gist is, the transport company was doing well, so well. He and my ex-sister-in-law bought an island in Canada. Then some woman got her hooks into him, and he ended up divorced, selling the company. Supposedly, this woman's husband started driving for him, thinking they could make money together. She wriggled her way in and seduced him. They set it up so her husband would catch them together on the island. My sister-in-law divorced my brother, took half the company, and they had to sell. What a pair of thieves! I downed my drink in one go. How much did they extort from him? I asked. My brother never told me, but they got something, she replied. Do you remember their names? I inquired. I did, but I forgot, she answered. I decided to be honest with her, though I feared it would end our relationship. So I opted for one last physical encounter. Afterward, I almost convinced myself not to reveal my identity because the lovemaking had been unparalleled. Knowing the truth would likely spell the end for us, especially since I was preparing to leave her house. I dressed, sat on the edge of her bed, and began. The time has come. Let's revisit the story of your brother's divorce. Was what you told me the official version or his perspective? I asked. He told me, so I took it as official. Why do you ask? She replied. Because everything happened completely differently, I said. What do you mean? She asked. So I recounted the true events. Halfway through, she abruptly got out of bed, still unclothed, and listened intently. In conclusion, I asserted that Julie and I had merely ended in divorce, not extortion. Her response was curt, "You're lying, get out." "I'm not lying, this is the truth," I insisted. She hurled a pillow at me. "You're lying, get out, and don't return with these lies." I departed, disliking such endings yet cherishing the memory of our final closeness. Life moved on. I experienced another social lull, unable to find a way out of my rut. One evening, feeling indulgent, I dined at a posh restaurant. After finishing my main course, I scanned the room and spotted Hannah and her brother a few tables away, with a small cake adorned with candles. I signaled for the bill, paid it, then boldly approached their table and sat down. They regarded me like an alien. Her brother spoke first. "Are you sure you're at the right table?" he asked, clearly not recognizing me. "Indeed, and I think it's time you told your sister the truth about your divorce." "She knows about it," I said. "Who the hell are you?" he retorted. "But evidently she doesn't know the real truth, so you need to set the record straight," I said firmly. "Freak you," he shot back. "Scott, what are you doing?" She nearly shouted, "Get out of here." Miraculously, the waiter appeared. "Is everything all right here?" he inquired. "This guy," Hannah said, pointing at me, "sat down uninvited and maltreated my brother. I want him to leave." "Certainly, sir, I must ask you to depart," the waiter insisted. I faced Bradley first. "You're something else," I said. "Just go," Hannah demanded. Leaving, I figured it might be our final meeting. Back in my shop, I focused on my favorite projects, axes and chainmail. The next weekend, a festival awaited, where I brought shields, axes, and chainmail samples for Teddy. He got me a vendor pass and introduced me to Diana, dressed in period attire with a revealing gown. "Diana, meet Scott." "Scott, Diana," Teddy said. "Scott crafts our pieces, and he's got some new ones today." "That's what I do," I said, fetching the new items from my truck. Teddy and Diana admired them like treasures. Amid the bustling festival, we shared a meal and enjoyed the lively atmosphere. I wanted to ask about Diana, but the chance never came. Teddy later explained she and her sister organized festivals nationwide. "If you hadn't shown up, she would have." "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" "I would have found a motel," I replied. "No chance, they're all booked," he said. The next day, Diana was a hit, and we had a profitable weekend selling out our stock. After the festival, Teddy convinced me to stay another night before heading home. I rushed to craft chainmail. Upon returning, barely sleeping all weekend, around 3 a.m., Hannah appeared at my door, intoxicated and with police in tow. "Are you Scott, man?" one officer asked. "Yes," I replied. "Is she your girlfriend?" he inquired. "I know her, but she's not my girlfriend," I clarified. "Are you sure?" "She insists you're her boyfriend," he pressed. "Not even close. Last time I saw her, she called me a liar and kicked me out of her house," I explained. "We're taking her with us," he said. "Where are you taking her?" I asked. "To spend the night at the station," he replied. "No, don't do that. I'll take care of her," I offered. "Are you sure?" he questioned. "No, but I can't let her spend the night at the station," I affirmed. I helped her inside and settled her on my bed, the only one available. I considered sleeping on the couch, which was preferable to the air mattress in Teddy's tent, but I preferred my own bed. Instead, there was a snoring, drunk woman in it. The next morning, I woke up and went to work. I heard nothing from her all day and expected her to still be asleep when I returned home. I was wrong. She was gone, and the apartment was spotless. I searched for a note but found nothing. Despite my efforts, I didn't manage to complete a single new piece of chainmail. Teddy stopped by and picked up shields, swords, and axes I had stashed. We debated hiring help, but qualified metal workers were scarce. We decided on training instead, placing ads in the local newspaper and the festival newsletter. On a Friday evening, I was in the workshop working on inventing a machine to speed up chainmail production. There were a few available on the market, but I believed I could improve upon them. It was late, and I was tired when there was a knock on the door. It was a sober-looking Hannah. "Thank you for rescuing me from the police," she said. I nodded. I tried to clean up after her. "Everything's okay," she nodded back at a loss for words. As we stood there in silence, "Listen, it's been a long day and I need to get some sleep," I said. I gently moved past her, closed and locked the door, then headed to my car. "Good night," I said. As I was about to get into the car, I heard her voice. "You were right, my brother lied." "I'm sorry," she admitted. I simply waved over my shoulder, got into the car, and drove home. Armor making fascinated me. After Teddy critiqued my initial attempt, I conducted extensive research and created another suit that served as a template for future pieces. They were labor-intensive, time-consuming, and incredibly challenging, but I relished the challenge. Feeling prepared, I debuted it at the next festival, where Teddy was impressed. While we could have sold it several times over, we chose to showcase it as a sample of my craftsmanship. Visitors admired it, commented, and if interested in purchasing, we discussed customization options. My festival ventures were prosperous and fulfilling. I purchased a trailer to transport my tools and materials, enabling me to move between festivals. Sometimes I worked at a booth, engaging with visitors, while other times I crafted in the private vendor area. One evening between festivals, I conversed with my father and marveled at the unexpected success of Renaissance metalwork. Who would have known so many people were interested in armor and could afford it? These items weren't cheap, I remarked. After the festival season ended, I began dating a girl I met at our local car dealership. I was considering buying a new truck since my dad's welding truck was old. The plan was to outfit my new truck with welding equipment, sell the old one, and possibly upgrade to something newer and bigger. While she was getting her car serviced, I admired a new truck outside the showroom. We struck up a conversation and ended up exchanging phone numbers. A week later, we went on our first date, followed by a second, and so on. One evening, after I drove her home, she invited me inside. We had a second drink, and I sat on her sofa. She stood in front of me and started unbuttoning her blouse. "Do you mind if I get more comfortable?" she asked. "Not at all, as long as I get to watch and enjoy," I replied. She grinned. "That's the whole idea. I undress while you watch, then you undress while I watch, then we have lovemaking, hoping it won't end too quickly. It seems like you've planned everything out." "Oh, absolutely." As her blouse came off and her skirt was about to follow, I reached for her underwear, but she gently pushed my hands away. "Let me handle this. Just watch and enjoy. You do like watching a lady undress, don't you?" "I'm not sure. I've never really paid attention before," I admitted. She let out a deep, throaty laugh. "I hope you're better in bed than you are at lying." Her bra joined her blouse on the floor. "You're pretty confident, aren't you?" "Very," she said. "Now it's your turn." I began unbuttoning my shirt. "Slow down, Tiger. We have all night. Let me enjoy the show." I slowed down and she licked her lips. I kicked off my shoes, unbuckled my belt, and unzipped my trousers. As I started to pull my pants down, she placed her hands over mine and knelt down, following my pants to the floor. She stopped when she was on her knees, looking up at me. "What's next, t-shirt or shorts?" she asked. "Which do you prefer?" "The t-shirt. Save the best for last." I removed my t-shirt and tossed it aside. She picked it up and brought it to her nose. I love the scent of men," she murmured. I left around 3 in the morning. The whole drive home, I compared her to Hannah and the last time we had lovemaking, unable to decide who was better. The relationship lasted a solid 4 months before we broke up. Later that evening, I noticed several missed calls and messages from Hannah. "Scott, please call me as soon as you get this message. It doesn't matter what time it is, please," her message read. I took her at her word and dialed. She answered after 2 rings. "Hello, Scott," she said. Her voice sounded slightly slurred. "I woke you up, I think. I dozed off. I tried to stay awake waiting for your call." "All right, I'm calling. What's so urgent?" I asked. "I wanted you to know my brother lied about his divorce. You were right, and I'm sorry." "You've already apologized for that. Is there something else?" I inquired. "Yes," there was a pause. "Can we see each other again? I miss you," she confessed honestly. "There's no way you and I can see each other knowing who your brother is and what he did with my wife. If we got serious, it would inevitably cause problems with him, and I'd always feel uncomfortable. I'm not putting myself through that." I could hear her crying. "I knew you'd say that, but I hoped you wouldn't. Goodbye, Scott." The Renaissance festivals were back in full swing. I secured my passes, bought a tent and camping gear, and hit the road. I spent most of my time assisting Teddy at his booth. When not doing that, I worked on creating new items for sale. My armor-making skills had improved significantly during the off-season, and at each festival we sold at least 1 piece. While demand was high, each piece required a substantial amount of time to craft. 2 days after closing one festival, Teddy asked if I could join him at the next one. I agreed, and since he was nearby, he brought his trailer with everything I needed. I loaded up my truck and left my trailer at home, taking his instead. I worked 3 festivals in a row, garnering attention from visitors. I even demonstrated my chainmail machine. By the 3rd festival, the next event on my schedule was near Philadelphia and spanned 11 days, making it one of the largest in the country. Unlike others, which ran Thursday to Sunday, this one started on a Thursday, continued through the following weekend, and ended the weekend after. I spent 2 weeks at home preparing materials, primarily focusing on armor. My father became adept at crafting shields, axes, and swords. I worked late into the night. One evening, late into the night, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find a very intoxicated Hannah stumbling into my arms. "Is this your girlfriend?" one of the 2 police officers accompanying her asked. "If it keeps her out of trouble tonight, I guess so." I half-guided, half-carried her to my bedroom and simply dropped her on the bed. I showered, shaved, changed into pajamas, and set out clothes for the next day, anticipating the possibility of her returning in a similar state. The next morning, I checked on Hannah, still asleep. I debated whether to stay and attempt a conversation or simply let it go. That evening, I went to work. Upon returning home, I found the house immaculate. She had even cleaned the kitchen. In the bathroom, my toothbrush and toothpaste were in different places, so I rearranged them. Both were wet, as was the washcloth on the sink. I took a frozen enchilada from the freezer and heated it up for dinner, though I didn't eat much. The following morning, I departed for the festival in Philadelphia, bringing along all my materials for shields and chainmail. My plan was to conduct numerous demonstrations. The first day was incredible, and it only improved from there on. That initial Sunday, a large crowd watched me nearly all day long. By the time the festival closed for the day, Teddy and I were both exhausted. Evenings in the vendor area were always lively, serving as the epicenter of the party scene. There, people cooked, played music, drank, rehearsed sword fights, repaired or tried on armor, tended to horses, and engaged in physical activities. It wasn't uncommon to stroll past a tent and hear sounds of closeness, or see a camper or van gently swaying. After things quieted down, I sat outside my tent and thought how nice it would be to have someone inside to cuddle with. Hannah was probably free, but I couldn't bring myself to call her. Monday's crowds were moderate, but foot traffic remained steady throughout the day. Attendance records weren't broken, but it was bustling enough. In the middle of the day, while demonstrating the painstaking process of assembling chainmail, I glanced up and saw Hannah watching me. I continued my demo, inviting questions from onlookers. None were posed, and the crowd eventually dispersed, leaving Hannah standing there. "Do you enjoy doing this?" she asked. "Yes, I do," I replied. "You're good at it," she said. With that, she turned and melted into the crowd. I didn't see her again until the end of the event on Wednesday. My parents arrived with more shields and axes. I showed them around, though they didn't seem entirely pleased with what I was doing. I pointed out where the vendors were set up, particularly to my mother, who disapproved of my tent setup. The remainder of the week and the weekend were successful, leaving Teddy and me satisfied. Upon returning home, I took a day off, during which my father helped me with chainmail work in the shop. As I discussed plans for a larger motorhome and trailer, the door opened and Hannah walked in. "This festival was a blast. A few friends and I are heading to the next one nearby," she said. "We even talked about going in armor." "Sounds like fun," I replied vaguely. "Will you be there?" she asked. "Probably," I answered. My father and I kept working, not making eye contact with her. "Can I come with you?" she inquired. "Not very practical since I'll be there from Wednesday to Sunday," I said. "No worries, we can get a motel room," she suggested. "Highly unlikely. Those book up months in advance," I explained. "Where do you sleep?" she asked. "In a tent," I replied. "That sounds cozy. Maybe we could share," she proposed. "It's a small tent," I said. "Small ones can be cozy," she said. My father glanced at me, grinned, and excused himself. "Listen," she said, "you'll never forget that my brother had an affair with your wife, so we can't have a serious relationship, but that doesn't mean we can't be friends with benefits, right? We enjoy lovemaking together, don't we?" I hesitated. "So why not use each other? You can date whoever you want, but if you're not getting any action, I can help. What do you say?" I looked at her. "You're amazing, and I've said it before, but the idea of sharing doesn't sit well with me. I can't just have lovemaking with you knowing you might leave for someone else, even if you haven't yet. We both deserve to find real relationships and respect them." She stepped closer, touched my face, and kissed me. "You don't get it. I'm already in a relationship. If you want to date others, go ahead. Just know I'll always be there for whatever you need, whenever you need it. I don't need anyone else. I love you, and I fully intend to honor this arrangement." She kissed me once more and departed. My father must have watched her leave. "What are you going to do about her?" he asked. I kept staring at the door through which she had just exited. "I honestly don't know, Dad." "What do you think?" "You've got two choices," he began. "Either come to terms with the fact that her brother had an affair with your ex-wife and accept that she may stick around, or leave town and keep a low profile. Maybe it's time to consider what your mother and I discussed." "What's that?" "We'll talk about it when we get home." At the dinner table later, he filled my mother in on Hannah. "So I thought maybe it's time we gave Scott that gift we talked about." "I think you might be right," she said. "What gift are you talking about?" I asked. "I don't like the idea of you sleeping in a tent," my mother said. "We're going to buy you a motorhome," my father announced. Arguing with them seemed pointless, and I actually thought it was a good idea. It took a week to find exactly what I wanted. Since I already had a Class A CDL, I didn't need driving lessons. So I hugged them both, thanked them, and bought a trailer to tow behind it. I set up the trailer so I could work inside if needed and connected power from the van to the trailer. It was an excellent setup. I focused on crafting armor while my father worked on shields, swords, and axes. We both found immense satisfaction in this type of work. Teddy became envious when he saw my trailer and asked if I had christened it yet. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Have you had lovemaking in it yet?" He clarified. "No," I replied. He grinned. "Do you mind if Diana and I chuckled. "Go right ahead." He texted her and she arrived in 10 minutes. He took her hand and off they went. They held hands and laughed when they returned. "We wanted you to be the first to know," he said. "Diana and I are getting married." She hugged me. "It was your van that clinched it," she said. "Thank you." That weekend, I didn't see much of any of them, but my van smelled like perfume and more. Back home for a week, Hannah spotted the van and dropped by. I'd been in a dry spell and knew I could get her into bed, so I gave her a tour and she was suitably impressed. "This is much better than a tent," she remarked. "Yes, indeed," I agreed. "It's got a double bed, doesn't it?" she asked. "Yes, and a sizable closet. And I bet this shower can fit too," she asked. "It probably can," I said. We were in the van's living area when she approached me. "Has it been christened yet?" she coyly inquired. "What do you mean?" I asked, though I knew exactly what she meant. "Has anyone had lovemaking in it yet?" I fibbed. "No, it's brand new."
"Well," she almost whispered, "we could do it now or this weekend."
Since we were in my parents' yard, now wasn't feasible. "What do you mean this weekend?" I asked. "After the festival ends each evening," she suggested. "We could then." "Sorry, this is Southern Virginia. Even if I said yes, it's too far a drive for you." "You're right," she conceded, "so I'll just come with you." "Did you not hear what I just said?" She started tugging at my shirt, pulling me closer. "Scott, you admitted I'm the best you've ever had, and you're the best I've ever had. Plus, I'm in love with you. And I know you like me more than just a little. We should just have lovemaking whenever we can. Also, I have a dress that would be perfect for the festival. Everyone will love it. Especially you." She kissed me softly and tenderly, as if she were in love with me. "I'm leaving here at 5 in the morning on Tuesday. I won't wait for you," I meekly stated. She kissed me again. "Or you don't have to." And she was right. She unpacked her clothes, stocked the kitchen, and by midnight Monday she was in the van's bed. As soon as I got behind the wheel Tuesday morning, she came and sat in the passenger seat, wearing only a robe. I knew because she glared at me every time I glanced her way. She met Diana, and both wore low-cut dresses that accentuated their curves. I couldn't wait for the workday to end. At closing time, Teddy and I shut down the booth. Hannah and Diana were cooking dinner in the van upon our arrival. I'd never tasted Hannah's cooking, but it was delicious. After Teddy and Diana left, Hannah asked if I wanted to shower with her. There was enough space for two, and from there, we moved to the bed. That night marked the beginning of many nights and days spent enjoying each other in that van. This was also 3 years ago. Initially, her family tried to convince her that I only let her travel with me despite her brother. He had convinced them that Julie and I were the cause of his divorce, not him. Obviously, none of them had been in court to see the truth, and, like Hannah, they believed him. Hannah provided them copies of my divorce decree and her ex-sister-in-law's statements. He stayed in town and was responsible for a couple more divorces before deciding that the other side of the country would be better for his health. Hannah now has several new dresses for festivals. They don't highlight her belly as much. She never said she wanted to be a wife before becoming a mother, but I know it's on her mind. It's on my mind, too.
She stammered, her voice shaky with panic. John didn't look at her. His eyes remained on the screen, his voice cold and detached. "How long has this been going on?" he asked, his tone icy. Rachel's eyes filled with tears as she collapsed onto the couch. "It was a mistake," she sobbed. "I didn't mean for it to happen. It was just the stress from work, from everything. David, he made me feel, I don't know, important. But it didn't mean anything, John. I swear it didn't mean anything." John finally looked at her, his gaze full of pain and anger. "It didn't mean anything? You destroyed our family and it didn't mean anything? Rachel's sobs grew louder, but John felt nothing but a numb, hollow ache. He stood up, his voice steady but filled with finality. I want you out. I don't care where you go, but I want you out of this house by tomorrow. Rachel begged for forgiveness, pleading for another chance, but John had made up his mind. The woman he had trusted with his heart had shattered it, and there was no going back. Over the next few days, John allowed Rachel to stay in the house, pretending to consider her pleas for forgiveness. She desperately clung to the hope that they could rebuild their marriage, showering John with affection, cooking his favorite meals, and suggesting couples therapy. But John had no intention of taking her back. Instead, he began plotting his revenge. He hired a private investigator who quickly uncovered that David had a history of affairs, not just with Rachel, but with multiple women in the office. There was also evidence of financial misconduct. David had been embezzling company funds to finance his lavish lifestyle, including his affair with Rachel. John pretended to forgive Rachel, acting as if he was willing to work through their issues. He went to therapy sessions with her, letting her believe that they were on the path to reconciliation. But all the while, he was gathering the final pieces of his revenge. After weeks of planning, John was ready to execute his plan. He sent an anonymous package to David's company board containing the evidence of David's affairs, workplace harassment, and financial misconduct. The fallout was swift and brutal. David was immediately fired from his high-profile position, his reputation in ruins. His wife filed for divorce, taking their children and a significant portion of his wealth. The media picked up the story, and David became a public disgrace, unable to find work in the industry he had once dominated. Rachel, now without her job or her lover, was left to deal with the aftermath of her decisions. The affair had cost her everything: her marriage, her career, her reputation. She reached out to John multiple times, begging for another chance, but he had already moved on. John filed for divorce, gaining full custody of their children. He had been through hell, but in the end, he had come out stronger. The affair that had once threatened to destroy him had only made him more resilient. Betrayal can break you, or it can make you stronger. In John's case, it gave him the strength to take control of his life and ensure justice was served. What would you have done in his situation? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real-life dramas right here on Storyline Chronicles. Remember, sometimes the best revenge is moving on and thriving. Thanks for watching. Second part of the story. Here are some possible questions and answers. Based on the detailed story, aimed at engaging the audience after watching the video. Q1. Why did Rachel cheat on John? Rachel's affair with David was likely driven by a combination of factors: stress from work, feelings of neglect or emotional disconnect, and the allure of power and attention that David offered. While this doesn't excuse her actions, it's a reminder that unaddressed issues in a relationship can lead to poor decisions. The affair seemed to stem from her desire to feel valued and important, which she mistakenly sought outside of her marriage. Q2. Do you think John was too harsh in his decision to divorce Rachel? This is subjective and depends on personal values and boundaries. Some viewers might feel John acted decisively after discovering the betrayal, as trust is crucial in any relationship. Others might believe that, given their history and children, trying to work things out in therapy might have been an option. In the end, John chose to protect himself and his children from further hurt, which was his way of reclaiming control over his life. Q3. Why did Emily decide to expose Rachel and David's affair to John? Emily, David's assistant, had likely witnessed multiple inappropriate relationships and unethical behavior from her boss. She had a moral compass that pushed her to expose the affair, as she felt John deserved to know the truth. Her decision to come forward might have also stemmed from a sense of guilt for staying silent for so long and witnessing other affairs David had been involved in. Emily became the catalyst for John to uncover the betrayal. Q4. Was John's revenge against David justified, or was it too extreme? Many would argue that John's actions were justified given the personal and professional damage David caused. David not only engaged in an affair with John's wife, but also had a history of manipulating women and engaging in unethical business practices. By exposing him, John didn't just seek personal revenge, he also brought justice to a corrupt man. However, some might view it as too calculated and that John could have chosen to simply walk away without destroying David's career. Q5. Could John and Rachel have saved their marriage after the affair? While anything is possible, it seems that the trust between John and Rachel was too severely damaged. For a marriage to heal after an affair, both partners must be willing to rebuild trust, communicate openly, and address the underlying issues that led to the betrayal. In this case, John decided that the betrayal was too deep to overcome, and his path to healing was through ending the marriage. Caput 6. Why didn't John confront David directly? John chose not to confront David immediately because he wanted to gather enough evidence to expose him completely. By not confronting David emotionally or impulsively, John was able to plan a methodical approach that ensured David faced not just personal consequences, but also professional and legal repercussions. It was a strategic move that allowed John to maintain control over the situation and exact his revenge in a calculated way. Q7. Was Rachel remorseful about the affair, or was she just trying to save face? Rachel appeared remorseful after John confronted her with the evidence, but it's unclear whether she was truly regretful about the affair or simply desperate to salvage her marriage and life. Her tears and pleas for forgiveness might have been genuine, but it's possible that the sudden realization of losing her family and career motivated her more than actual guilt for her actions. The audience can decide whether they believe Rachel's remorse was sincere or driven by fear of consequences. Q8. Did John's revenge actually help him heal, or did it keep him stuck in anger? John's revenge was a way for him to reclaim control after feeling deeply betrayed and powerless. For him, ensuring that David faced the consequences of his actions seemed to bring closure, allowing him to move on with his life. While revenge doesn't always lead to healing, in John's case, it appeared to give him the sense of justice he needed to let go of his anger. Whether or not it was the healthiest way to cope is open to interpretation. Q9. How do you think John's children were affected by the affair and divorce? Though the story doesn't dive deeply into the children's perspective, it's safe to assume that they would have been impacted emotionally by their parents' separation and the tension in the household. John's decision to seek full custody may have been driven by a desire to provide stability for his children, as they likely witnessed their mother's growing distance and the fallout from the affair. How they cope would depend on how John handles the situation going forward. Q10. Should John have given Rachel another chance, considering they had children together? This is a question of personal belief. Some might argue that for the sake of the children, John and Rachel could have attempted counseling and worked on their issues, as co-parenting amicably can be important for children's well-being. However, others will likely agree with John's decision to prioritize his emotional health and trust issues over keeping the family unit intact. His choice to divorce Rachel suggests that, in his mind, the damage was irreparable. Q11. What would you have done if you were in John's position? This question is designed to provoke audience engagement, encouraging them to reflect on how they would handle the same situation. Some may say they would seek revenge like John, while others may lean toward forgiveness, counseling, or simply walking away without seeking retribution. It's a powerful question to spark dialogue among viewers, each bringing their own experiences and perspectives into the conversation. Q12. Do you think revenge was the best way for John to deal with the situation? Revenge can feel satisfying in the moment, but it doesn't always bring the emotional closure someone may need. While John's calculated revenge brought justice to David and ruined his career, it's debatable whether it truly helped John heal emotionally. Some viewers might argue that John should have focused on his own healing process rather than expending energy on revenge. Others, however, might feel that his revenge was cathartic and helped him regain control of his life.
Pacific Airlines Flight 739 was preparing for takeoff from San Francisco to New York. In the terminal, hurried passengers were making their final adjustments. Before boarding, among the hurried passengers was a 7-year-old girl with blonde hair and curious eyes, holding her father's hand tightly. She wore a light blue dress, a soft contrast to the bustling airport atmosphere. Her father, a stern-looking man, seemed distant, almost absent, as he typed frantically on his phone. Inside the plane, flight attendant Harry was making the final preparations for takeoff. Tall and with a welcoming smile, Harry was known for his ability to handle any situation on board while always maintaining calm and courtesy. He walked through the aisles, checking the overhead compartments and ensuring all passengers were comfortable. As he passed row 12, Harry noticed the girl and her father settling into their seats. The girl looked directly at him, her large eyes reflecting a mix of curiosity and something more, perhaps a plea for help. Harry smiled at her and continued his walk, but the feeling that something was off remained. The cabin was filled with murmurs and muffled laughter as passengers got comfortable. Harry returned to the front of the plane to give the safety instructions. He glanced at the girl's father, who was now more focused on his phone than on his daughter. The girl, on the other hand, seemed restless, looking around as if searching for an escape or an answer. As the doors closed and the plane began to taxi on the runway, Harry couldn't help but think about that girl. He had seen many children on his flights, but there was something different about her, something that intrigued and worried him at the same time. With takeoff complete and the plane stabilized in the air, Harry decided he would keep a close eye on row 12. The seemingly routine flight was about to turn into something much more complex and unexpected. The flight attendant, unaware, was at the start of a journey that would change both his life and that of the girl forever. With the plane cruising, Harry made his first round through the aisle, handing out drinks and snacks to the passengers. As he approached row 12, he noticed the girl was more agitated. She looked around with wide eyes, as if searching for something or someone. Her father remained engrossed in his phone, oblivious to his daughter's restless behavior. When Harry offered drinks, the girl took the opportunity to speak to him. She gently tugged on his uniform sleeve and in a low and urgent voice said, "Sir, can I talk to you?" Harry crouched down to her level and smiled gently. "Of course, how can I help you?" The girl looked nervously at her father before responding, "I'm scared. I don't want to be here," she whispered, her eyes filled with held-back tears. Before Harry could respond, the father looked up, noticing the interaction. With a cold look, he pulled his daughter back to her seat. "Don't bother the flight attendant, Jenna," he said in a firm, controlled voice. Harry nodded and moved away, but the concern didn't leave him. He continued his rounds but kept a watchful eye on row 12. Something was definitely wrong. Determined to understand the situation better, he returned to his station and watched discreetly. Shortly after, Harry noticed Jenna doing something peculiar. With subtle, careful movements, she was making signs with her hands, hiding them from her father. Harry tried to decipher what she was trying to communicate, but he couldn't fully understand. Intrigued and worried, he decided to seek help. During a break, Harry went to the galley and called one of his team members, Rose. "Rose, I need your opinion on something," he said, quickly explaining the situation. Rose frowned. "Maybe she's trying to tell you something important. You need to find out what it is without alarming her father." With Rose's new perspective, Harry returned to the aisle. He saw that Jenna was now more desperate, her signals more intense and urgent. Harry knew he needed to act quickly but cautiously. He had to figure out what the girl was trying to communicate before it was too late. Determined to help Jenna, Harry planned a discreet approach. He took a notepad and a pen and, pretending to take drink orders, approached row 12 again. When he got close to the girl, he quickly wrote a message, "Are you in danger?" He showed the note to Jenna, hiding it from her father with his body. The girl looked at the note, then at Harry, and gave a slight affirmative nod. Harry felt a chill down his spine. He needed to understand more. He continued walking through the aisle, watching from a distance. Jenna started making hand signals again, this time more clearly. Harry realized she was drawing letters in the air. It took him a few seconds to understand, but he finally deciphered the word help, confirming his suspicions. Harry knew he needed to act quickly. He went back to the galley and asked Rose to cover for him for a few minutes. Then, he went to the nearby restroom and waited for a moment when Jenna could leave her seat without attracting her father's attention. After a few minutes, the girl managed to escape and met Harry in the restroom. Locked in the small space, she finally opened up. "My dad, he did something bad. I don't want to go with him. I'm scared," she confessed. Harry reassured her, promising that she would be safe. "Jenna, I need more details to help you." "What exactly did he do?" he asked, keeping his voice calm. Jenna, with tears in her eyes, explained in a low voice, "He took me without my mom's permission. He said we were moving somewhere else and that I would never see her again. Please, don't let me go with him." Harry's heart tightened. He knew the situation was serious and needed immediate attention. He hugged Jenna and promised he would do everything in his power to protect her. Returning to the cabin, Harry discreetly informed the pilot about the situation, who contacted the authorities at the destination. They arranged for the police to be waiting when the plane landed. The girl went back to her seat, and Harry kept a watchful eye as the flight continued. The mystery was beginning to unfold, and the tension on board was increasing with each passing minute. As the plane continued its journey, Harry kept a close watch on row 12. He needed to ensure Jenna's safety until the plane landed. Her father still seemed oblivious to the situation, engrossed in his phone. Harry, trying to remain calm, began jotting down notes in his pad to appear busy. He quickly wrote a plan of action for the rest of the flight crew, detailing the need to monitor row 12 and keep a close watch on the girl without alerting her father. The tension increased with every moment, the flight seemed endless, and Harry knew any mistake could put Jenna in even more danger. He felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders but had no intention of failing. Midway through the flight, the plane encountered unexpected turbulence. The shaking made passengers grip their seats, and Jenna looked at Harry with wide, frightened eyes. He gave a slight, encouraging smile, trying to convey a sense of security. When the turbulence passed, Harry noticed Jenna's father observing her more closely, as if he sensed something was wrong. Harry knew he had to act quickly to prevent the father from becoming suspicious. He approached Rose and whispered, "We need to keep things calm. The father is starting to get suspicious." Rose nodded and began engaging with nearby passengers, diverting attention from any suspicious movements. Harry returned to row 12, this time bringing a cup of juice for Jenna. "Here you go, to help you feel better," he said, handing her the cup with a smile. Jenna took the juice and gave a small smile in gratitude. As he walked away, Harry felt a momentary relief, but the feeling was brief. He knew he had to be ready for any eventuality. Approaching the cockpit, he informed the pilot once again about the need to be prepared for a quick and discreet disembarkation with the presence of the police. The following hours were tense. Harry and the crew worked in perfect coordination to ensure Jenna's safety, disguising their actions with routine tasks. Each minute felt like an eternity, but the plan was in motion. With each step, Harry felt hope that everything would end well despite the imminent danger. As the flight neared its destination, Harry noticed Jenna becoming increasingly anxious. Her father, though still focused on his phone, occasionally cast suspicious glances toward her. Harry knew time was running out, he needed to act carefully. He decided to talk to Rose again, who was serving coffee at the back of the plane. "Rose, we need a plan to get Jenna away from her father as soon as we land. We can't wait for the police to get here. We need to move fast," Harry said urgently. Rose thought for a moment and suggested, "We can use the disembarkation as a distraction. I'll make an announcement saying everyone needs to exit quickly due to a technical issue. That should scatter the passengers and give us a chance to separate Jenna from him." Harry agreed, recognizing the effectiveness of the plan. He returned to the aisle, keeping a close eye on row 12. As the plane began its descent, he discreetly prepared Jenna. "When we land, we need to leave quickly, okay? I'll take care of you. Trust me," he whispered. Jenna nodded, her expression a mix of fear and hope. Harry returned to his station, anxiously awaiting the moment of landing. When the plane touched down, Harry felt an immediate sense of relief followed by a surge of adrenaline. The plan was in motion. Rose made the announcement, and passengers began moving towards the exit with more urgency than usual. Jenna's father stood up, holding her hand tightly. Harry approached quickly and said, "Sir, let me help your daughter disembark. It will be faster and safer for everyone." The father hesitated, but the general confusion made him accept the help. Harry took Jenna's hand and led her towards the front of the plane, his heart racing. He knew every second counted. As they exited, a group of undercover police officers disguised as airport staff was waiting. Harry handed Jenna to one of the officers and returned to the father, who was starting to realize what was happening. "What are you doing?" the father asked, his voice full of suspicion. Harry remained calm and responded, "We are ensuring everyone's safety, sir. Please follow me." The police quickly detained Jenna's father, explaining the situation, while Harry walked away with Jenna. Jenna looked at him, still scared but relieved to be away from her father. Harry felt a wave of relief as he watched Jenna being taken to a safe place. He knew the hardest part was over, but there was still much to be resolved. The revelation about Jenna's father and his intentions had changed everything. Now it was time to ensure Jenna's safety and that justice was served. The organized chaos of disembarkation began to dissipate as passengers were directed towards the terminal. Harry watched closely as the undercover police officers escorted Jenna's father to a secure area. Suddenly, the father realized what was happening and tried to break free, yelling angrily, "You can't do this. She's my daughter." Jenna, hearing her father's voice, cowered behind Harry, who maintained a protective stance. "Please stay calm, sir. The authorities will clarify everything," Harry said, trying to calm the situation. But the father was unwilling to cooperate. He struggled and managed to break free from one of the officers, advancing towards Jenna with a furious expression. The surrounding passengers began to step back, scared. Without thinking twice, Harry placed himself between the father and the girl. "Stop! Don't make this worse," he said firmly and authoritatively. The father hesitated for a moment, but his rage seemed uncontrollable. He tried to push Harry aside, but before he could advance, the police tackled him to the ground and quickly handcuffed him. "This is a mistake," he yelled. "She's my daughter." As the father was taken away, Harry knelt beside Jenna, who was crying silently. "You're safe now. Everything will be okay," he said gently and reassuringly. Jenna looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude and fear. Harry hugged her, offering comfort. She desperately needed it. He knew she was about to face a whirlwind of emotions and that her life was about to change forever. The police returned to talk to Harry. "Thank you for your help. We'll take care of Jenna and ensure her safety. You might need to give a statement about what happened during the flight," said one of the officers. Harry nodded. "Of course. I'll do whatever is necessary." As the police led Jenna to a safe area, Harry felt a mix of relief and exhaustion. The situation had been intense and dangerous, but he knew he had done the right thing. He watched as Jenna disappeared with the police, knowing there was still more to be done to ensure her safety and justice. The confrontation had been the most intense moment of his career, but also the most rewarding. Harry was about to leave the security area when one of the officers called him. "Sir, can you please come with us? We need a bit more information," the officer said politely but firmly. Harry agreed and was taken into a room where Jenna was sitting with a social worker. The girl looked more relaxed but still showed signs of fatigue and fear. The social worker motioned for Harry to sit down. "Jenna has told us part of what happened, but we'd like to hear your version as well," said the social worker. Harry nodded and began to recount the events of the flight, from the moment he noticed Jenna's strange behavior to the confrontation with her father. He explained how the girl made signals asking for help and how he and the crew planned to ensure her safety. As he spoke, Jenna held the social worker's hand for comfort. The officer took detailed notes, and the social worker occasionally interrupted with more specific questions. "Did you notice any other suspicious or dangerous behavior from the father during the flight?" asked the social worker. Harry thought for a moment. He seemed completely disinterested in his daughter, focused only on his phone. But the look he gave her when he realized we were interacting, it was scary. He seemed more irritated than concerned. The officer finished his notes and thanked Harry for his cooperation. He stood to leave, but Jenna called to him in a soft voice, "Harry, thank you," her eyes filled with gratitude. Harry smiled at her, feeling a wave of emotion. "You were very brave, Jenna. Everything will be okay now." As he left the room, Harry felt the weight of the situation begin to lift. But just as he thought everything was under control, he heard an alarm go off. A commotion began to form in the terminal, with people running and shouting. "What's happening?" he asked one of the guards. "There was an escape attempt. Jenna's father tried to escape custody," the guard replied, clearly agitated. Harry felt his heart race. He ran back to the room where Jenna was. When he arrived, he saw the girl was safe with the social worker and 2 officers. Her father, however, was nowhere in sight. We need to reinforce security here. He can't get near her again, said Harry, trying to stay calm. The terminal was in chaos, but the police quickly organized a search. After tense moments and a frantic search, they finally located Jenna's father hiding in a restricted area. He was restrained again, this time with reinforced security. With Jenna's father finally detained and taken away, Harry returned to the room. Jenna ran to him and hugged him, relieved. He returned the hug, feeling a mix of relief and satisfaction knowing she was safe. The extreme situation had been resolved, and Harry knew Jenna was now in good hands. The sense of duty fulfilled stayed with him as he walked away, certain that despite everything, everything would be okay. With Jenna's father finally detained and security reinforced, Harry felt a wave of relief. He returned to the room where Jenna was now accompanied by a group of professionals, including social workers and child psychologists. "Jenna, you're safe now," said one of the social workers with a warm smile. "We'll take care of you and make sure everything is all right." Jenna looked at Harry, still holding his hand. There was a silent connection between them, a mutual understanding of what they had gone through together. "Harry, thank you for everything," she said, her voice soft but full of sincerity. Harry smiled, crouching down to her level. "You were very brave, Jenna. Always remember that." As Jenna was led away, Harry felt satisfaction but also exhaustion. He knew he had done everything in his power to protect the girl. As he watched the team take Jenna, one of the officers approached him. "You did a great job today, Harry." "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't noticed the signs," said the officer. "I just did what anyone would do," Harry replied modestly. Later in the terminal, Harry saw a woman approaching quickly, her eyes filled with worry and tears. It was Jenna's mother. When she saw her daughter, she ran to hug her, holding her tightly. "Jenna, my God, are you okay?" she said, her voice choked with emotion. Jenna clung to her mother, crying but this time with tears of relief and joy. "I'm okay, Mom. Harry helped me," Jenna said. The mother looked at Harry with infinite gratitude. "Thank you. You saved my daughter," she said emotionally. Harry nodded, feeling touched by the moment. "She's a very special girl. I'm glad I could help." As the mother and daughter reunited, Harry felt a deep sense of accomplishment. He knew Jenna was in good hands and that the situation, despite how difficult it had been, was finally resolved. Towards the terminal exit, feeling the day's weight begin to dissipate, the night sky was clear, and he took a deep breath, reflecting on the events that had unfolded. Despite the challenges and dangers, the courage and determination of a little girl and the quick actions of a flight attendant had changed the course of her life. As he left the airport, Harry knew that this experience would stay with him forever, a reminder that even in the most difficult moments, it's possible to make a difference and bring safety.
I'm Tom Joad, and my wife is Linda. Our paths crossed in college when I was 23 and she 21. At that time, I was in the Army pursuing a dual degree in economics and accounting, while she pursued a major in biology. My military duties were sporadic but hazardous. Our unit was tasked with discrete missions, often involving retribution against someone seemingly friendly. In essence, we functioned as assassins, with my specialty lying in planning and close combat. I graduated at 25 and 2 years later, I resigned from the Army to marry Linda. Within 4 years, 2 daughters arrived. I worked independently, handling accounting for local businesses and trading commodities from home. Linda, busy with the kids, later secured a position at a local college-affiliated laboratory after a decade of marriage. With both girls in school, I worked from home to facilitate Linda's return to employment, which she enjoyed. We resided in the house I grew up in, having bought it from my parents when they moved to Florida. Some of our Army missions offered the unit a chance at loot, which we divided among the members. Having some financial stability, we opted to celebrate one February. We went out with our neighborhood friends for dinner and dancing at a club. There were 8 of us, each with a babysitter for the night. Linda and I had booked a room at the hotel connected to the dance club. She looked stunning at 5'6", slim, with brunette hair, dressed in a blue silky dress. We had an enjoyable meal and a great time dancing at the club. During the evening, a group of 6 entered, including Mark Stevens, a prominent local team's all-pro linebacker. He was noticed by all the women at our table, accompanied by a lovely blonde woman wearing what seemed like a large engagement ring. Our friend June mentioned she was a cheerleader for the team, engaged to Stevens. After some time, Stevens focused on our table and approached. Without acknowledging me, he asked Linda to dance. I attempted to intervene, but Linda went along without a backward glance. Annoyed, I walked to the bar, passing by them. Linda seemed indifferent as I got a coffee. After 2 fast dances, a slow number played, and Linda embraced Mark. Feeling irked, I walked to the bar, ignoring disapproval from the women at our table. Linda, absorbed in her dance with Mark, didn't notice. When the slow number ended, they separated, and Linda walked back to our table. I stayed at the bar, sipping my coffee. Spotting me, Linda seemed flustered and sat next to June. Approaching them, I remarked that they seemed to have had their fun, though I may have gotten a bit carried away. June explained that it was just a bit of dancing, nothing serious. Feeling offended, I took a seat as June and Linda excused themselves to the ladies' room. When they returned, Linda wasn't with June. Curious, I asked where Linda was, and June informed me that she had left with Mark. Shocked, I rushed outside and saw Linda getting into a red Escalade, which then drove off. Back at the table, June addressed the others, questioning if they were aware of Linda's actions. I suggested to June that she should let Linda have her night and that she would likely return the next day. Frustrated, I asserted that I didn't need Linda to come back and declared that our relationship was over when June talked to her. This proclamation caused a stir at the table, with some thinking I was too harsh. Angrily, I snapped at them, expressing my desire to have nothing to do with any of them, considering they knew what was happening but didn't warn me. As I headed towards the coat check desk, I noticed a blonde woman at the table with the others who had come with Stevens. She was in tears, so I approached and asked if she was his girlfriend. She confirmed that she was, but clarified that it was no longer the case. She revealed that they had gone to their house on Cherry Lane, and he had promised not to do such things once they were engaged. Apologetically, she mentioned that he would likely be finished with Linda by morning and would drive her home, enjoying gloating at the husband. The other 2 guys, one black and one white, took offense, but I ignored them. I handed May my business card and told her to give me a call. Despite her tears, she smiled, and I walked away. I retrieved my coat but left Linda's, then went to the hotel room and took my case, but left Linda's. I checked out. While driving home, a fully formed plan came to me. This had happened to me while I was serving, and it's why I was alive now. It's a shame a plan hadn't occurred to me then. Before Linda left, I parked my car in the garage, engaged the security system, and retrieved a rope stored in the basement. I undressed, put on a black Under Armour suit, a black hoodie, dark gray sweatpants, old sneakers, and 2 sets of gloves. I also grabbed a baklava mask. Climbing up to the attic with the rope, I fastened it securely to a beam, as I had done in my childhood home. I climbed out of the narrow window, bounced down the side of the house, and ran through the wooded area on that side. I hopped the side fence and headed to the rear workshop. Inside, I got a backpack, extra wool socks, a penk, and an old hand axe from a toolbox. I packed everything and grabbed my bike, pedaling toward the river through the woods, across the river bridge, and up toward Cherry Street. Spotting the house with the football statue and a red Escalade, I used the axe to break the passenger side window, triggering the alarm. I hid behind a porch pillar, and when the door opened, I swiftly dealt with the man with 2 blows of the axe. Returning inside, I closed the front door, turned, and jogged off. I jumped the stone wall, retrieved my bike, and took the wool socks out. I put the axe, knife, gloves, and shoes inside the backpack, zipped it up, and mounted up, riding away toward the river. Near the bridge, I stopped and tossed the entire backpack as far as I could into the fast-moving river. There had been rain the day before, and the river was moving fast. Riding my bike back home through the nearby woods, I let myself inside the workshop. I changed my socks and switched to another pair of sneakers. Spraying an ammonia solution on the bike handles and pedals, I wiped them clean. Jogging back, I hopped the side fence and climbed up the house's side, which proved to be more challenging than expected. Nevertheless, I made it and scrambled through the small window. Pulling up the rope, I wound it and wiped the windowsill with a rag. Trotting down to the basement, I used the rope to remove all my clothing, including the mask and undergloves, and put them into the washer. In the basement bathroom, I showered for an extended period, washing everything twice. After completing that, I put on a pair of exercise shorts and went upstairs, leaving the basement door open to hear when the washer stopped. Contemplating for a moment, I decided to wear the clothing from the club the night before. Returning to the basement, I transferred the wet clothing to the dryer. Going upstairs, I made a snack, had a shot of whiskey, and sat for a while, reflecting on things. When the dryer stopped, I took the clothes upstairs, putting them away. The baklava mask went back into the closet where I had initially stored it. Glancing at the clock, it was 2:50 a.m. The entire sequence, from entering the house after the club to this moment, began at midnight. Going downstairs, I sat on the couch, had another whiskey, and fell asleep. I woke to the door chime, checked the door camera display, and saw two individuals, an African-American woman and a white guy with a crew cut. They were cops. The doorbell rang again, and I opened it. Detective Asper and Detective Logan introduced themselves as they flashed their badges. I was uncertain and asked about Linda, expressing my concern for her safety. They assured me that she hadn't suffered physical damage, but mentioned that Mr. Stevens had been attacked. I invited them inside and inquired about Linda's location. The white detective informed me that she was in the hospital receiving treatment for shock. Pausing for a moment, I looked at them, and they returned the gaze. Indicating the couch, I suggested they take a seat. They chose separate straight-back chairs, and I settled on the couch. "I think you should explain what happened," I proposed. Detective Logan repeated the question, asking what I had done since Linda left the club with Stevens. Detective Asper responded, urging me to share the details. Insisting on an answer, Detective Logan pressed, and I explained that I had gone to our hotel room, packed my things, and driven here. I had then consumed enough drink to fall asleep on the couch. They inquired about anyone else being present, and I confirmed that the kids were with a sitter for the night. When asked if I had made any calls or sent emails, I replied in the negative, but emphasized that I had never left. Detective Asper observed the surroundings and noted the security system. Inquiring about its coverage, I offered to show them. "I was here. Come upstairs," I suggested. They followed me to the upstairs office, and I sat at the computer desk. Demonstrating the system, I downloaded data from 6 p.m. to their arrival. I provided them with a jump drive, explaining that the system focused on all 3 doors, front, side, and patio, including the sliding door to the pool area. However, the side I had come down had no door, faced the woods, and had 2 large windows that didn't open, lacking coverage. Logan stated they would need to confiscate the computer. I questioned the need, suggesting they might have tampered with it before arriving. Logan agreed, but emphasized it couldn't be gone for more than a day. I assured him I would download the same data onto an external drive. I carried out the task as they requested to look around. I allowed them, but I insisted they stay together and with me. They took some pictures and then left. It was 7:10 a.m. I informed Linda's parents, John and Stephanie, who lived in the next neighborhood over, about what had happened. They were at their lake house at the time. John was taken aback by Linda's actions, while Stephanie seemed less surprised. Stephanie asked if I planned to see Linda, to which I declined, expressing my reluctance to have anything to do with her after what she had done. I explained that the guy being attacked was a bad break, but it wasn't my responsibility. Apparently, he had a history of such behavior. I mentioned that when Linda gets out of the hospital, she needs to stay away from me in the house, and we can make arrangements for her belongings. John suggested I move and let Linda stay, but I asserted that it was my house and not community property. The conversation ended, and I called my parents in Florida recounting the events. They too were shocked by Linda's behavior. My dad mentioned a headline about Stevens being attacked and executed at his home, which didn't come as news to me. The landline rang, and it was Judy. She inquired about Linda's whereabouts, having heard about Mark's pass away. I confirmed Linda was in the hospital with shock and expressed my reluctance to see her. Judy urged me to support Linda, but I insisted she would never have my support, considering what she had done. The conversation turned heated, and Judy accused me of being a pig before hanging up. I showered again and got dressed to pick up the kids from the sitter around 8 o'clock. When we got home, the kids asked about Linda, and I informed them she wouldn't be there that day. I suggested we carry on with our day, getting dressed for soccer. I took them to the soccer complex for their noon and 1:30 games. I relaxed while watching them play, and afterward, we enjoyed ice cream before heading home. Upon returning, I found messages on my muted cell phone. One from Linda's parents stated she was at St. Jude's Hospital, non-communicative. Another from a doctor at the hospital requested a call. One was from Judy telling me Linda was with the police and not talking to anyone. She said I should probably cool off and bring the girls to see her. I called the girls downstairs, explaining that their mom was in the hospital, emotionally damaged, but not physically injured. They wanted to know what happened. I told them, your mom went off with a famous football player to his house to have lovemaking last night. There's no other way to say this. I thought about keeping it from you, but I figured you'd find out when she was there. Someone attacked the football guy, but apparently not her. But she must have found him or something, because she is in the hospital in shock. They hesitated about visiting her, but I instructed them to get dressed, and we proceeded to the hospital. I called Dr. Laura Thompson again, who conveyed that Linda was traumatized and currently in a catatonic state. Inquired about bringing the kids. She hesitated. The doctor asked if I planned to see her. I expressed reluctance. I suggested bringing the girls if it might help. Did they know about the circumstances? Referring to Linda's involvement with the football guy? Yes. I informed the doctor that the girls were dressed and ready to come if she believed it might aid Linda. She agreed to meet us at room 3 in 30 minutes. At the hospital, Dr. Thompson, a psychiatrist in her late 30s, spoke briefly with us before addressing the girls. She explained their mother's severe shock and apparent disorientation, suggesting that seeing the girls might be beneficial. The girls expressed a desire to see her. I accompanied them to the door and looked in. Linda sat in bed, staring at a TV with cartoons. Tentatively, the girls approached. Laura, the oldest, touched her hand and called her mom. Shelley followed, but there was no reaction. Shelley started to cry. I comforted her, picked her up, glanced at Linda Northing, and took Laura's hand to lead them out. I mentioned that we had tried. Laura asked if Linda would wake up. I assured her that she would eventually, and suggested they might visit her again soon. Shelley whispered, asking what if she doesn't wake up. Reassuringly, I said she will. I know it. Maybe. Slowly the doctor stated, Girls, I will surely let you know when she comes back from this. We left the hospital. Both girls were crying in the car. I questioned whether I should have taken them, desiring to see if their presence would help Linda. Despite my callous reaction to her infidelity, I hadn't wished this upon her. I felt remorseful, though she deserved to suffer not like this. I felt some tears on my cheeks. Back home, I made eggs and toast for them to eat, intentionally involving them in the cooking to lift their spirits. Then, I put on a movie for them. In my office, I called a friend, a public defender, seeking information on what happened at Stevens's house after I left. He couldn't obtain police reports, but suggested ambulance run reports might be publicly available. I asked him to get that if possible, and we hung up. In the living room, I watched the movie, pondering what might happen in an hour. My lawyer friend called back, emailing me the ambulance run, revealing a distressing situation. I shared details of the police visit. He stated that if security showed no one coming or going, I likely didn't need to worry. However, he cautioned about potential police actions and recommended a lawyer if needed. Though I believed I didn't need a lawyer, I called the recommended woman. After reviewing the ambulance report, police found Linda with Stevens's head cradled in her lap, covered in blood, dressed in a thin robe, chanting "no" repeatedly. The police took her to the hospital, where she remained unresponsive. An officer had asked if she saw who did it, but she provided no response. This sickened me, making me wonder if she would ever recover. I researched PTSD, having done so before. Specifically, I explored shock-induced catatonic states, noting recovery from the catatonic state but potential long-term effects of PTSD. Lawyer Joan Drake scheduled a Monday morning appointment at 9:30, providing her cell number for early police contact, though none occurred. On Sunday, the girls and I lounged, attempting to reassure them about Linda's eventual return and acknowledging she might still need our help. I wondered about Linda's reaction to me, doubting she had witnessed anything significant. If she did, it would likely be a person in black with a mask, though assumptions were uncertain. I didn't think she had any experience with me that would lead her to seriously consider me capable of what I did. Monday, after sending the girls to school, I monitored local news coverage of Stevens's end of life. Linda's name wasn't mentioned, but it was known he hosted a married woman during the attack. Police were called by a neighbor in response to Linda's screaming. So far, no one but the authorities had connected Linda or me to the liquidation, but I thought that would change in time. Joan Drake, a nifty-looking blonde of maybe 45 years, heard the story, received the ambulance report, and was appalled. After sharing the security video's integrity, I requested my computer's return for work, providing a retainer. Joan called the police station, requesting Detective Asper for its retrieval. I had previously looked up PTSD, and for me, I researched shock-induced catatonic states. It seemed that people typically recovered from the catatonic state, but might be affected for years by PTSD. The lawyer, Joan Drake, made an appointment for me to see her that Monday morning at 9:30. She gave me her cell number in case the police came earlier, but they didn't. She insisted that I had enough time to see if it had been altered, assuring me that I knew it hadn't. I agreed, stating, "Okay, I'll send someone tomorrow morning to get it from you." "No, I'll send someone from the office." I shook my head, indicating he won't be coming. She nodded in understanding. "Okay, he'll be there, 9 o'clock. When she was off the phone, I conveyed to her that I wouldn't talk to the cops and that I'd have a phone with me to record the discussions, if any. I departed that afternoon. Upon the girls' return from school, they immediately inquired about Linda. Earlier, I had contacted the doctor, but there was no significant change. They dove into their homework, and later, we ordered pizza. Jokingly, I mentioned that if their mom didn't return soon, I'd have to learn how to cook, which elicited laughter. However, I'm actually quite skilled in the kitchen, just not accustomed to cooking at home often. When Laura's sister went upstairs, Laura inquired about my willingness to forgive Mom for her involvement with another man. I responded that, at the moment, I simply wanted her to get better. Shortly after, the landline rang, and Jim Beeman from the newspaper identified himself as being from the Trib. He conveyed, "We have information suggesting it was your wife Linda who was with Mark Stevens when he was executed. Can you confirm that?" Expressing a preference for the matter to remain private, I elaborated on the potential consequences for my two youngsters in school. Jim proposed, maybe if that information were to come out. Reluctantly, I confirmed it and was questioned about my feelings regarding the pass away of my wife's lover. Acknowledging the situation, I stressed that any damage to my family resulting from their publication would lead to legal action against him and his paper. Jim asserted, "This is going to come out, Mr. Jode. I can't prevent that." Observing a TV truck parked in front of the house through the window, Channel 7, I conceded, "I see a TV truck. I suppose you're right. Sorry, I have to go." A knock came at the door, and checking the camera feed, I noticed a young woman with a microphone. I communicated over the intercom. "Leave. You're trespassing, and I will call the police. Is your wife there, Mr. Jode?" I called the local precinct and requested assistance in removing the press from my front porch. They responded, dispersing the group of 6 people, but the trucks remained, totaling 4. Next, I called the doctor and urged her to secure Linda before the press invaded. I also discussed relocation and adjusting the girls' schooling with them. However, they insisted on continuing to attend their current school, even if they had to live elsewhere. I said I'd consider it. I contacted my lawyer Joan seeking advice. She agreed to issue a statement to the press to alleviate the situation. The statement, issued through her office, expressed our desire for privacy, stating no comment on the rumors about my wife and no future comments. It warned that the media's continued presence outside the house would be actionable if it damaged the family and requested the trucks to leave. Meanwhile, Detective Asper and her commander announced a press conference for 7 p.m. Watching it, the police disclosed that Mark Stevens had been attacked and executed with a sharp object outside his home. Although a woman was inside the house at the time, there was no indication that she witnessed the attack. The investigation was ongoing. The initial query revolved around the woman's marital status and whether her husband was a suspect. Detroit Rasper remarked that, given everyone knew her name, it was assumed she was married. He stated a thorough investigation of the husband revealed no indication of his involvement in the attack. In fact, he appeared to have been at home all night. A reporter, situated some distance from the scene, inquired about other women, particularly married women and their husbands. The police acknowledged systematically investigating claims of Mr. Stevens seducing married women, finding some truth to it. Stevens seemed to have taken several married women while their husbands were present, prompting further investigation. Commander Johnson interrupted, concluding the proceedings, and announced that any additional information would be shared before the Wednesday briefing. The police departed amid shouting. I arranged with the girls' school to have their work delivered or sent electronically for the next few days. I called Linda's parents, advising them to be wary of the press, though none were present, at least for now. They had also vanished from our street. On Tuesday, the doctor called, reporting Linda's responsiveness, and the police were with her. I informed her parents and took the girls to the hospital. Upon our arrival, the police were just leaving. Detective Asper expressed a desire to talk to me, and after meeting with her, I agreed. Linda appeared dazed, exchanging greetings with the girls through smiles and hugs, but her acknowledgement of me seemed minimal. The girls provided updates on the TV trucks and school, yet Linda appeared to drift off, prompting the doctor to suggest letting her rest. While her parents conversed with the girls, I engaged in a conversation with Detective Asper. Asper remarked that she seemed to be recovering. I responded, stating that maybe she was, but I didn't really know. I asked if he planned to take her home until she recovered. Asper mentioned that after her recovery, he was sure they would be separated. I suggested that he should give her a break and questioned what more punishment she could receive than what had already happened. I clarified that for me, it wasn't about punishment, but about respect and trust. I expressed that I would never trust her and I would never respect her, noting that the feeling might be mutual. Asper smiled, suggesting that she might fear me and I might not be trusted either. He accused me of trying to provoke him, stating that he knew he had nothing to do with Stevens getting attacked. He acknowledged my Army background and formidable reputation in the service, speculating that maybe a regular guy couldn't have done it, but perhaps I could have. I insisted that I didn't, emphasizing that we had home security footage from Stevens's house. Asper dismissed it as not his problem, asserting that he wasn't there, and concluded with a veiled threat, saying he'd be seeing me around. In the next few days, Linda gradually exhibited normal behavior. I took the girls daily, but didn't spend much time in the room with them. On the fourth day, Linda was set to be discharged. She requested a private conversation with me, and I sent the girls out. She apologized for her actions, acknowledging that embarrassing me like that required more than a simple apology. Linda expressed her desire to come home when released. She noted the media presence and their potential disruption to the girls' lives, suggesting she could sneak out. I gave her a long look, stating that she was good at sneaking out. She didn't look up and mentioned checking with security. I acknowledged that I couldn't say I wanted to be around her, but for now, I had little choice. I expressed that I didn't mean for her to be hurt and shared my thoughts on her actions. When asked about whether Stevens had slept with her, Linda replied that they were undressed in bed when the commotion started. I stared at her and knew she was lying. I couldn't say I believed her or would believe anything she told me. Trusting her again was out of the question. I suggested that we see how things go, but made it clear that I couldn't trust her again. Despite all this, I expressed my love for her and walked out. Later, I went to the hospital security office to arrange for a car to pick Linda up behind the building and take her to my house at 4 p.m. The plan went off without a hitch, and she arrived home around 4:45. The kids and her parents were there with me. I had set up a bed in my office for myself, while Linda would sleep in our room. The rest of the day was very awkward. Linda, her mom, and the kids played Monopoly in the living room. Her dad and I went to the patio to talk. John asked what I was going to do. I admitted that I didn't really know, but the odds were that we were finished. I encouraged him to try to forgive, emphasizing the long history of love between them and their wonderful family. John expressed doubts about their long-standing love, questioning Linda's actions. He was particularly troubled by the fact that she said they didn't have closeness. I acknowledged her statement, but emphasized the uncertainty, given the amount of time they spent together. I suggested it might make a difference if protection wasn't used and raised concerns about potential consequences, like diseases or pregnancy. John didn't find the thought pleasing and agreed to let Linda stay for the time being, but advised me to find another solution soon. We returned inside, ate pizza, and her parents went home. As far as I knew, they did not discuss the Mark situation with her. While putting the girls to bed, Laura asked Linda why she went to have lovemaking with Mark. Linda apologized, admitting her weakness and wrongdoing. Laura expressed confusion about Mark, stating he wasn't their daddy, and promised to discuss it later when she knew more. The girls went to bed, and Linda went to the kitchen. I followed about 10 minutes later, making a call to my public defender friend about the autopsy report. He confirmed it was a public document and agreed to get it. Linda, drinking a Pepsi, asked if I would be sleeping in our room. I replied, "No, the office." She welcomed me any time but acknowledged the uncertainty in our future. I expressed skepticism, and she suggested being patient, emphasizing that it all happened in the past week. I climbed up to my office and went to bed, but didn't sleep well. I woke up at 5 a.m., made coffee, and received the autopsy report from my friend. Reading it carefully, especially the analysis of the injuries, revealed evidence of ejaculate and female secretions on Stevens's phallus and scrotum. It seemed Linda had lied about not having closeness, a belief I held due to the timing of her presence at the scene, about 2 hours before the exterminating. When she descended, we got the girls off to school, almost like usual. They were a bit subdued, though. While driving them, I spent a good amount of time reviewing my options. If it hadn't been for Linda's illness, I would never have allowed her back into the house. But there were advantages to that, including making things a little easier on the girls if things settled down. Just as I entered the house, another TV truck pulled up outside, and a young woman got out, shouting if Linda was at home and if I forgave her. I smiled, waved, and warned her not to come onto the property. I went inside. Linda had made some biscuits and offered me one, which I took. She informed me about a TV truck outside, expressing uncertainty about whether they knew I was there, and suggesting that maybe they shouldn't. I inquired about what the TV crew wanted, pointing out that they had already published my name and details about my activities at Mark Stevens's house. Linda questioned if they could cause more damage, and I acknowledged that they probably could think of something. I looked at her, contemplating what to do. She questioned if I meant about her or about us. I clarified that I wanted her to write down exactly what happened last Friday, from when the confrontation occurred until she ended up in the hospital. I suggested it didn't have to be immediate, but I wanted it soon if possible. Linda agreed to try, acknowledging that it might be traumatic, and mentioned the need to call work to check if she still had a job. I questioned why her job would be at risk for cheating on me, expressing doubt that her workplace would care. She explained she had been off for a week and called her workplace. They allowed her to put the week on sick leave and the next week on vacation time. She then went to her bedroom typing on her computer. I left her alone and went to my office, where I started researching the autopsy material. I ensured that I would receive the results of the tests done, but it might take a few more days. Despite the situation, Linda seemed to be attempting to behave normally around me. I acknowledged this, but believed she must have questions about what happened. Our routine continued for 2 days until I got the test results from the autopsy. Linda's DNA coital secretions were identified on Stevens' phallus, so she lied about the lovemaking for sure. I was waiting to see what she wrote to me about what happened, but I just couldn't see continuing life with her as my wife. After dinner the next day, Linda came into my home office. I finished writing here. She handed me a printout. I read what she wrote. Linda apologized, expressing regret for her weakness. She recounted the events at the party, explaining that when Mark asked her to dance, she felt thrilled due to his captivating presence and reputation. While dancing, she didn't think of anything else. During a slow number, she found herself at his mercy, pulled to him, and felt his size and hardness. She admitted that at that moment, she would have slept with him right there, captivated by his attractiveness. Mark suggested slipping out the side door to go to his place, promising her the coital experience of her life, a proposition she believed. When the dance ended, and I wasn't at our table, she arranged to go to the women's room with Jay. When I returned, she could sense my anger, but thought I would get over it in time. Desiring Mark, she went out the side door, and they drove to his house. Mark kissed her, carried her upstairs to his bed, and they slept together. She cleaned him and performed another closeness act, but a car alarm interrupted them. Mark left, instructing her to wait. Looking out the window, she couldn't see over the porch roof, but noticed someone in black running away and jumping the fence. Linda found a robe, went to the front door, and discovered Mark lying in the driveway with a bashed-in head. She felt guilty, as if it was her fault for sinning. The police arrived and she ended up in the hospital. She apologized for everything, expressing love and confusion about her actions. I looked up at her, tears streaming down her face. She asked if I was the person she saw. I clarified that I was at home all night, drinking and regretting the end of my marriage and the changes that would come to my family. I admitted to having hate, but assured her that the police confirmed my presence with the security tape. She acknowledged what they said, but I interrupted, expressing my belief that Stevens got what he deserved. She disagreed, saying he didn't deserve that, and emphasized that he was nice and had an impact on my life. I replied that we didn't need to go there, stating that I would never be able to love her again, maybe not at all. I pointed out that the person I thought I married would never have done what she did. I questioned if the lovemaking was worth what was lost, for both of us. I acknowledged that the lovemaking was spectacular, but not worth the consequences. I reflected on the possibility of coming home the next day if things had been different, but with Stevens dead, I felt screwed up for good. She affirmed that I executed him and promptly ran out of the room. Under my breath, I muttered that she executed him. Following that, our relationship turned extremely cold. I made a firm decision not to attempt to convince her of my innocence or to mend our relationship in any manner. I also resolved never to admit to her what had transpired, as I assumed that if I did, she would immediately betray my trust to the authorities. She had just admitted that, had Stevens not been executed, her reckless night would have been worth facing the consequences. Maybe not in those words, but still. I filed for divorce. A few weeks later, I asked for custody of the kids so they could stay in the house. Linda still had her job, so I asked for no alimony, but also no child support and liberal visitation. Linda had recovered sufficiently that I insisted that she move out. She went to stay with her parents. I had her served there. Soon after, her father called. He wanted me to withdraw the papers, said Linda was distraught. I told him that she deserved to be distraught, and she should get a lawyer. He was quite angry, but I didn't know if he was angry with me or her. He inquired about visitation, and I informed him that she could come over any night and stay until they went to bed. Linda visited the next day at 5 o'clock. I had prepared macaroni and cheese, and we ate with the girls. We played board games with them and put them to bed. After that, Linda expressed a desire to talk, but I declined. She insisted that we needed to work things out for the sake of the girls, suggesting that they would have to adjust if we were apart. She proposed finding a place where they could visit, emphasizing that the sooner we worked out the divorce, the sooner I could have a visitation schedule. She pleaded, expressing regret for her mistake and professing her love. I rejected the idea, stating that there was no way we would stay married after her open involvement with that man. I made it clear that it was time to move on. Linda began to tear up, quietly crying. Despite feeling some sympathy, I was not sorry enough to change my mind. Our marriage was over. The divorce went through. We worked out a joint custody agreement, and Linda had an apartment with a big second bedroom for the girls. The two of us settled into a distant but amicable relationship, focused on the girls. After about 4 months, I began to date women from our circle and from work, knew that I was unattached, and I seemed to attract their attention. When Linda had the girls, I brought several women home for the night. None of them lasted too long, though, but the lovemaking was usually good and sometimes great. I stayed away from married women, although some of them seemed anxious to be with me, but after my experience, I thought it immoral to do that. Linda was good with the girls, and not so good by herself. She was taking antidepressants and sleeping a lot, but she managed to go to work and do her job. I was told by her parents and the girls that she was not dating. 10 years on, Shelley went off to college today. Laura was to go to her junior year. The two of them had gotten used to the joint custody arrangement and seemed to do quite well. They both dated in high school and presumably in college. For Laura, I've had a long-term relationship with a younger woman named Cody, whom I met at a bar one night. Like me, she was divorced, with 2 children at home. and her husband had moved to the West Coast. We met when she was 35, and her kids were in high school, twins in their sophomore year, heading off to college. She and I moved in together at my house. I loved her. She was lively and smart, and the lovemaking was great. While she might not have been as much of a beauty as Linda, she was pretty, and guys paid attention to her when we went out. I informed her early on about all the commotion surrounding Mark Stevens's pass away, without revealing how he had died. The publicity eventually subsided, and no one was ever arrested or charged. One Saturday, Detective Logan showed up at my house, and I invited him in. I was home alone. He mentioned his recent retirement and expressed his happiness about the good pension. I congratulated him and asked why he was there. He admitted that he became convinced I executed the man, adding that the man deserved it, though maybe not my wife. I denied any involvement, and Logan congratulated whoever did it. I questioned why he thought Linda didn't deserve it. Logan explained that it was just one night, and Linda did what many married women might do when someone came on to them. He suggested that if it had been a discreet meeting, perhaps we could have gotten over it, but it was too in our face. I inquired about his partner, and he shared that she was now a captain, a real go-getter. We shook hands, and he left. Regarding Linda, she eventually made a partial recovery. We rode together when I took Shelley to school. On the way back, I asked about her well-being. Linda mentioned she was okay and had a boyfriend, somewhat like a friend with benefits. I confirmed that Cody and I were together, and we might move in together once her kids went off to school. Linda whispered that she wished none of it had happened, expressing regret for the missed opportunity to be empty nesters and have some real fun. She apologized, and we both ended up crying. Later, she moved into her friend's apartment, but I didn't think she ever fully recovered from that night, and perhaps I hadn't either. I admitted to never regretting dealing with the man, believing it might have saved many marriages, an effective altruistic deed.